welcome everybody. Let me just stand up and say hello and welcome to members of the public. Apologies, you'll just see the back of me. Probably the best view. It's just the constraints of the room. Just to remind people, this is a meeting in public, and we have got some questions that are being raised by the public at the end of the meeting, and we'll reference that. So once again, thank you for coming. Make yourself comfortable. If you can't hear, shout out, but I'm hoping the acoustics are pretty good today. And we'll go into some introductions. So, welcome everybody. Steve, could you introduce yourself and we'll work around the table.
Morning, I'm Angela White, Chief Executive of Sefton CBS as a non-voting member today on behalf of the voluntary sector in the North West.
Hello everyone, my name's Adam Irvin. I'm here as a primary care partner member and my background is pharmacy.
Hello everyone, my name's Almar. I'm a partner member and I am the Chief Executive of St Helens and Merseyside Hospitals, Southport and Ormskirk Hospitals and leader of the Cheshire and Merseyside Provider Collaborative.
Good morning everyone, my name is Anthony Middleton. I'm the Director of Performance and Planning at NHS Cheshire and Merseyside.
Welcome to Waterloo in the beautiful Church Ward of the Metropolitan Borough of Sefton, which I'm proud to represent. I'm Paul Cummins, I'm the Cabinet Member for Adult Social Care for Sefton Council, and I'm a partner member for local authority on the ICB.
Good morning everyone, my name is Erica Morris, I'm a non-exec director.
Good morning, I'm Neil Large, I'm a non-executive director.
Hello, I'm Claire Watson, I'm the Assistant Chief Executive.
Good morning everybody, I'm Deborah Butcher, I'm Executive Director of Adult Social Care and Health and I'm Place Director of Sefton.
Good morning everybody, I'm Chris Douglas, I'm the Director of Nursing and Care at NHS Cheshire and Merseyside.
Okay. Raj Jain, Chair of the ICB.
Hi, I'm Andrew Bibby, I'm Regional Director of Health and Justice and Specialised Commissioning for NHS England. I'm here for the Luft agenda item to take a concurrent decision with the ICB.
Warren Escadale, Chief Executive of Voluntary Sector North West and Chair of the Cheshire and Merseyside Voluntary Community Social Enterprise Sector Health and Care Leaders Group.
Graham Irwin, Chief Executive, NHS Cheshire and Merseyside.
Hi, I'm Claire Wilson, I'm the Finance Director for the ICB.
I'm Fiona Lemons, I'm Deputy Medical Director and here today for Rowan Pritchard-Jones.
Tony Foy, Non-Exec Director.
Morning everyone, Diane Blair, Manager of Health Watch Sefton, but here on behalf of all local Health Watch across Cheshire and Merseyside.
Morning, Chris Moser, I'm the Chief People Officer for the ICB.
Good morning everyone, me and Ashworth, Director of Public Health for Cheshire West and Chester, and here is a Public Health Rep.
Debbie Fairclough, I'm here to do the minutes.
Thank you. Just some housekeeping first. Do try and use the microphones, be about a foot away from it, it'll work effectively. And also, the meeting is being filmed, so make sure that what's on your screen should be what's on your screen. It will be going out. Any declarations of interest that are pertinent to the agenda here today? Any good declarations? If we could go to the minutes of the last meeting of the 4th of August. Are there any corrections colleagues would like to make? Any matters arising not on the agenda? Anne?
Just with regard to the item on the North Mersey hyperacute stroke service that we discussed at the last meeting, I'd just like to pass on my thanks and praise to Fiona and James Sumner from Luft for the actions they took to enable the hyperacute stroke service to go live on the agreed date of the 19th of September, which was an absolutely huge task and has very much, I think, improved stroke care available to the residents of the North Mersey patch. So thank you very much for that, Fiona.
Thanks, Anne. And of course, very relevant to where we are today. Thank you. So if there are no further comments on the minutes, I'll seek people's approval for those minutes. Thank you. Board action and decision logs are in front of you. Hopefully it's really straightforward. Are there any questions on the action log? You can see they're on track and completed. And on the decision log, does that look true to you? Okay. take those as agreed. Okay, but I should have said at the beginning, there is a lot on the agenda. So please do be succinct, and if I think you've made your point, please forgive me when I say let's move on. So that's very pertinent, I guess, to our Chief Executive. Let's go on.
Are you going to say let's move on before or after I start speaking? Colleagues, I used the report of the Chief Executive to do 2 or 3 things to highlight some very important issues of the day, but also to include some items that don't fit comfortably elsewhere on the agenda. I'm just going to highlight 3 things today. I'm going to remind you 2 of them I require a decision of the board. And so the first one is our approach to the dealing with the annual report and accounts of the former CCGs. And by including this within my report today and by their publication on our website, we are discharging our duty to close down those old organisations. It is clearly not our intention to have a public annual general meeting of organisations that have now been abolished. The second item I wanted to highlight today, and again out of interest, we have the Sefton Place Agreement here as a good example that sets us in Sefton, but each of our 9 places are going through a process of development, and in that process of development, it may start from us taking our decisions within place. It may extend to us increasing the level of budget delegation to a place. It may go as far as forming a joint committee in place, and then it may ultimately move on to increasing the level of money that we have in pooled budgets within place. So effectively, the spending of the money is blind to the organisational responsibility. When we get to the point of forming a joint committee or entering into an increased pooled budget, it is my view that that is a decision reserved to the board, and we will come back to the board for that. But as the place process develops, and the example you have from Sefton here, Sefton have put together a really good, and I would call it, memorandum of understanding of how the place is going to work together transparently, openly, and make decisions together. So it's here as an example, but I want the board to give either myself or Claire, the Assistant Chief Executive, the delegated authority to sign such agreements on the board, but under the clear understanding we will return here if it is an increased budgetary delegation, a joint committee, or a pooled budget.
Okay. Can I take the board's comment and then seek a view on that request? Are people supportive of that? Yeah. Thank you, Graham.
Okay. So the final thing I wanted to talk about today is the announcement that the government made, which now feels a little time ago. And it's not for us to comment upon the composition of the budget, but we are very clearly here to serve and to implement. And the letter that was published to Parliament effectively represents our marching orders. It varies slightly our plans, it varies our priorities. So I just wanted to talk the board very briefly through some key points that I have picked out of the government's letter to Parliament on the NHS. And again, they use the acronym of ABCD, which is actually ABC double D, and I will come back to that. So the first A, ambulances. It is clearly true that the patient who is at greatest risk is the patient that the NHS hasn't had the chance to get to yet. So the fact that the government have called out an unacceptable and increased level of waiting for ambulance response times, I think is really important. Now, the government also called out that 45% of all ambulance delays are taking place in just 17 places across the country. None of those places are in Cheshire and Merseyside. So the first thing I wanted to say is we do better on this than most parts of the country, but we don't do well enough. Now, how you resolve the issue about ambulances not waiting to get to the next patient is partly down to flow through the whole system. They're able to offload quickly at a hospital, but then hospitals have to be able to process people quickly, get them into beds, and then discharge people in beds. So it's a whole system issue, this. But there are some things that we can do, and we will look at really carefully. So, for instance, our falls pickup service, are we convinced that we have a consistent falls pickup service across each of our 9 places that operates in a standard way through the same hours every day? And I can tell you we don't. So we're going to take this letter, we're going to look at our full services, and we're going to look at what we have to do to make sure that they are uniform, standardised and well used. The second part of the governance acronym, backlogs, I'm not going to say very much about that, apart from my understanding is the government like the NHS's plans for tackling the backlogs and the long waiters. The reason I'm not going to say very much about that is Anne is going to talk about that when she does the provider collaborative update to the board later. But again, the big risk around backlogs is if the NHS has a bad winter, that crowds out our ability to do planned work, and we won't meet the promises that we are making to our patients. The third big part of the announcement was care. And you will have heard that the government intends for there to be an extra £500 million nationally spent on care this winter, and particularly those elements of care that will support the earlier discharge of patients from hospital. We welcome this, but we don't know yet quite where the money is coming from. And I always fear that we're going to be told that we've got some of that money already. And secondly, we don't actually know how that money is going to flow and what the accountability arrangement is going to be. Now, however that money does flow, it's incumbent on us to make sure that we decide how to spend it together with our local authority partners. So it could be that the government will pay that money to local authorities via the NHS. It could be that they pay that money directly to local authorities. But it'll be really important that we have an agreed plan for the use of that money this winter to effectively address getting patients into the right place first time. Now, the fourth acronym, D for doctors. The government have called out really clearly the variation in getting access to primary care. Now, for us, I think we need to be really careful about how we interpret this, and we don't create a situation where we think that the problem is getting access to see a GP. And actually, we go back and we say, first and foremost, the big issue is all of the patients who tell us they cannot get through to their GP practice on the phone. Once they get through to the GP practice, we want them to be effectively triaged, and sometimes the right course of action will be for that person to see a physiotherapist, a pharmacist, a nurse, a social prescriber. So I think the big challenge there is going to be sorting out the perception of the poor telephony. But we have to do that in a transformational way, because if we just sort out getting the telephones answered quicker, that doesn't help us if we've just moved a backlog along through the process. And so again, we'll be coming back to the board in either October or November to set out really clearly our plans to help and support primary care to improve. And then finally, dentistry. I've told the board before when we've discussed the delegation of responsibilities for NHS England that it was an artefact of the 2012 Act that CCGs were not responsible for local dentistry. They should have been, and we should be, and we will become responsible from the 1st of April. So we will start now work on a strategy to see how we can improve access to NHS dentistry for our population. But I think the board need to be clear, what we are going to inherit is going to be a very difficult position, and the challenge for us will be significant and huge. So that for me is just a kind of high-level summary of things that will change our strategic priorities and focus. We can all have our views about how the message has been delivered to us, but the clarity helps us, and you will see us reflecting in the business of this board how we create the assurance and accountability payments to show you that we are making progress in those areas. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Any questions or comments? Steve?
First of all, Graham, thanks very much. A, B, C, or D, and marching. I think we're marching to some of a crass and fundamentalist march, actually, because behind those four letters is a whole series of very complex and strategic issues that need to be addressed. And certainly local government welcome the Adult Social Care Discharge Fund, the £500 million. There's enormous uncertainty as to where that money lies in an NHS budget. Is it going to local government or whatever? And I'd just urge that we all sit down on a partnership basis, particularly with adult directors of social care, to make sure we have the appropriate approach to that, so we do actually deal with the issues around delayed discharges in the right way.
Thank you. However the money flows, Steve, if the money flows through the NHS, we will only decide how we're using that in partnership with our local authority partners. And it wasn't arranged on this basis, but I am sitting down with the 9 directors of adult social care on Monday afternoon next week.
Thank you. Thanks, Graham. So we can see the recommendations were to note the report, approve entering Sefton Partnership Board Collaboration Agreement, people supportive of that, and of course that delegation that we discussed before. Thank you. If we can go on, Deborah, to Sefton, let me take the opportunity of thanking everybody in Sefton for making us so welcome and having a delightful vista. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome everybody to Crosby Lakeside Adventure Centre. I hope you take the opportunity to have a look round over lunch. I'm very pleased to be hosting the board meeting today. I just want to take you through a few slides about Sefton and really just to highlight some of the key issues for us and particularly around our priorities. The first slide in the pack just gives you a little bit of background about Sefton and about some of our key facts and figures really. I'm not going to go into all of the detail around those, and there's a lot more information that you can access through the health and wellbeing strategy. But you can see that we're a kind of an interesting mix of rural with fantastic coastline and an interesting mix of urban as well, with lots of demographic challenges across the borough. It's just wanting to highlight some of the key things around our marketplace. We contract with lots of domiciliary care providers. We have 3,500 care workers across Sefton, 128 care homes. So a lot of activity in social care with quite a volatile budget arrangement. And you can see there that obviously we've got some challenges around young people and around education, around educational attainment as well. And we've got the key challenges obviously around cost of living and how that will impact on businesses going forward. In the next slide, this just talks about really a summary of the key health and wellbeing challenges, with the most prominent being multiple conditions. And you can see the health challenges relating to obesity and long-term conditions. And this slide just illustrates that if Sefton was a village of 100 people, you can see there 60 people will be living with long-term conditions. And so it's really important that we support the prevention agenda and we support people to access good healthcare early on, and also to focus on things that will improve the social care determinants such as housing, such as access to advice, information, good education, etc. So all of those things combined to improve the position for Sefton residents. This is quite an interesting slide in terms of the fact that you can see here a gap in life expectancy and the difference between the most and least deprived areas in Sefton. And it's really important to note that COVID has impacted on this particular area, and particularly in terms of the right-hand side of the slide that shows the railway line, which shows the inequity really well and the stark differences across the borough. On the next slide, we have highlighted the current health and wellbeing strategy. This has been extracted from our strategy and has been based on some previous research carried out by John Moores University and our public health team. And you can see there the red circles, which highlights the areas where we are performing worse than other areas across the country, and also highlights the risks around hospitalisation from self-harm and the work around falls, which will be key as key areas for our integrated work programme and is contained within our Sefton priorities. The next slide, we have highlighted our integration journey, and so we're really proud of this integration journey in Sefton. We started really to work really collaboratively with strong partnerships through our Health and Wellbeing Board and through our Better Care Fund working group. We cemented those relationships really through the pandemic and started to work really closely with our partners across Sefton, particularly community and voluntary sector, faith sector, through our relationships in terms of the wider system partners, particularly in terms of how we responded to COVID. And what we wanted to do was really build on all of that, and which is what we've done through our integration journey. And you can see there that through our cabinet approval process and through our governance arrangements, we've established our Sefton partnership now from July this year. And we've signed, our partners have signed our Memorandum of Understanding, signed by all partners, to really reflect the way that we want to work together going forward in terms of addressing all the issues and priorities for Sefton residents. The next two slides really reflects the strategies that we have in place, our place plan and our health and wellbeing strategy. So we're working really to coalesce activity around these ambitions to make sure that we deliver for Sefton. And it's going to be a really challenging few years and a really challenging situation at the moment that we have in terms of our resources and in terms of the cost of living crisis. But what we really need to do is continue to focus on those ambitions and those priorities and not be distracted by all of those other things that quite easily can do that for us. So just wanted to reflect our strategies within the slide. Moving on to place director objectives, our place objectives. We've used all the data and intelligence that we have about Sefton to really work with our partners to identify the areas that we want to focus on over the next period. And these are highlighted within this slide. And I'll just run through some of the key areas just in terms of highlighting some of the things that we're already engaged in. So talked a little bit about place development. We're currently developing our monitoring framework and dashboard to incorporate the key areas of priority for Sefton. We want to get the Sefton Place Partnership governance right, so we've established our programme of activity. Later on in the slide deck, in the supplementary information, there is a slide that talks to our governance arrangements. And we're working on a refreshed set of priorities and a refreshed health and wellbeing strategy aligned to place plans. In terms of Start Well, it's really important that we focus on our children, a really good early start to life. We've got some really strong initiatives that have started to be developed around our CAM service, around waiting times, speech and language services, and we want to make sure that we focus on childhood obesity. And so lots of work being undertaken by our public health teams and our community voluntary sector to accelerate that, and we're in the middle of retendering our 0 to 19 service. In terms of Live Well, our improved community mental health model is starting to be developed. We're working very closely with system partners around a refreshed neurodiversity strategy in line with the Transforming Care agenda, and we want to make sure that we have improved access to early intervention and prevention for preventable diseases, and so all of that is contained within the commissioning plans for Live Well. In terms of our Ageing Well programme and programme around frailty, we're just about to establish our urgent care board for Sefton. We want to make sure that we progress our work around integrated community teams. We've already got integrated community teams established across Sefton, working really closely with our partners across the voluntary sector and Mersey Care. And we're working currently on a blueprint for integration, involving our communities teams and other partners to make sure that we wrap around GPs' primary care networks to support people at an early stage in terms of their health and social care requirements. Primary care network development is really important for us, and we are well aware of the challenge to primary care, the challenge to primary care estates. So we have a really strong focus on primary care estate programme, one public estate, and the marketplace will be at lunchtime. We have a stand which is dedicated to primary care working programme. So it'd be interesting for people to maybe take a look at all of that. We're doing some really good work with the council particularly around integrated estates using existing buildings such as the Strand, looking at opportunities to co-locate social care and health into those buildings. Social care is a huge priority for us. Graham earlier talked about the investment into hospital discharge arrangements. We have to really think about the cost of care, the market sufficiency strategy for adult social care providers, and we need to mitigate against market failure. So lots of activity around social care over the next few months, with more information to be contained within our website around all of that. The wider determinants work stream, obviously everything we do needs to be evidenced, and we want to make sure that we're picking up on our marmot priorities. So all of that, again, refreshed, contained within our priorities work streams. And you can see from this slide the key, some of the key things for noting around that particular work stream. Workforce, just launched the NHS System Leadership for Change model yesterday, with lots of partner organisations involved in that leadership model. Again, focusing on integration and working together more effectively to support vulnerable people in Sefton. Digital work stream, just to say that we have working on a more integrated model for digital inclusion, and we're utilising technology currently around telehealth, around care homes, supporting the increase in and support to care homes in terms of shared care records, and working on a programme for digital care records for adult social care providers in the whole. So lots of activity around our digital strategy. Just moving on to really big ticket items. Obviously, you know, a lot of the things I've talked about really at very high level will be contained within our strategies and will be published on the website, and we can provide details of that for the minutes. But obviously some of those things are longer term, and what we need to do really is focus on the here and now as well. So the important things around winter and how we plan for urgent care and support our acute system is a huge priority for us. So looking at joint work between health and social care around domiciliary care provision and around retendering some of our services to support winter and future issues and problems that we have in that sector. We have a strong partnership arrangement around primary care networks, particularly looking at the estate model. So again, we talked about the sustainability of GP practice, and that will be contained within our place plan refresh. And just moving on really, in terms of supplementary information, I've included some slides, Chair, in terms of governance, in terms of patient and service user engagement into our programme, and also really we wanted to just highlight that we've included in the pack a short film which is really sort of illustrates our integration journey and the work that we want to do together. It's a story about David. I don't know whether David will be here today, but I just want to thank David for his courage in coming forward and allowing the film to be produced. And it really just talks about our crisis cafe that we have commissioned together, developed together in partnership with the community and voluntary sector, with Mersey Care and with social care, and as a result of early funding that we received this year. So I would like to hand over to Terry to run that film, please.
David, I'm 57 years old. I suffer from a bipolar condition, but I don't let it define me. I'm a good listener. I'm thoughtful. Actually, why nobody snapped me up, I don't really know. My situation was that I was street homeless. My mental health was in precarious state. My physical health not much better. I've been out of hospital roughly 5 or 6 weeks, haven't been in there for a week. Dehydration, malnutrition, sleep deprivation. I just happened to see a flyer for the Crisis Cafe, and being an inquisitive rather than a nosy soul, I thought, what's all this about? It was beginning at that time of year to get dark earlier, and being where I was in a shelter on the promenade in Southport, I was conscious that there was a long time where it was dark and very bleak, so it just seemed like almost a place of refuge. After an initial chat with the manager, I was plied with food and drinks and encouraged to chat, take part in board games, dominoes, Scrabble, that sort of thing. Just get to know the other service users. It was a calm place, a safe place. They have supported me in countless different ways, some of them practical, got me registered with a GP, a winter clothing grant, referral to a food bank. They've offered to do my washing. They've stored belongings for me when I had nowhere else to put them. I'm a lot more positive than I was. I know that there is somebody there if I need someone. It's not possible to measure it. I've made some great friends through the cafe. There is nobody currently in my life who's been there for longer than Sharon and Sarah. That's one of the reasons why I've decided to volunteer, to try and give a little bit back to make up for what I've received.
Dave, he put a letter under my door. He said he wanted to try it, so I thought I'd give it a go. Here is the only place I found can help me. I've been to others, but this is the best one ever. I felt like I could come with my problems, which I've been holding back, but this is the first time. They've helped me start releasing those tears, which I would never have done. I was so happy, and I've never felt that happiness before. I always say thank you, because you couldn't ask for any money. This is worth its weight in gold.
But I am purely a volunteer. I obviously am not qualified to give advice. I can, however, fill in a form. I can put a kettle on. I can play board games and encourage others to do the same. Jigsaw puzzles. I can also, if somebody else could come and have a quiet chat. I think I've said before, I think that I'm a good listener. Seeing a change in some of the people who've come through the doors, I get a buzz from seeing other people progress. I've been given the opportunity to do training. It is something that I would like to progress with. I want to do more. I want to be better at what I already do. So yeah, I've got a lot to be thankful for.
Thanks, Deborah. And please do pass our thanks on to David, because what a terrific story, and it illustrates why we're here today. So thank you, and thank you for the presentation. If it's okay with people, I'm going to move us on to the next agenda after that fantastic presentation. Okay. Excellent. So we're going to go on to agenda item 8, which is the Liverpool University NHS Hospitals Foundation Trust Clinical Services Reconfiguration Proposals. And I think we need a bit of governance around this, which is that Andrew Bibby and ourselves will form, I think we're going to call it a joint committee to consider this item. So if we could record that in that way, I think Fiona and Andrew are going to lead us.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start and ask Andrew to come in at the end. And Carol Hill is also here from Liverpool CCG, who has done a lot of work on this, and here, particularly the public consultation, so can answer questions if there's specifics on that. The paper that you've got in front of you provides the background, the strategic context for these proposals, which have been under development for quite a long time. So pre-merger of Aintree and the Royal, they were under discussion, and progressed post-merger. I'm going to focus on 4 areas: the governance, changes to the original proposal, our public sector equality duty and the public consultation, and then the final business case and how it relates to the wider system financial picture. From a governance perspective, this is another of your inherited decisions. It's been through the whole NHS England assurance process through the CCGs and the joint committees of the CCGs, and that's detailed in section 5 of the paper. 4 of the 5 service changes have elements of specialised commissioning as well. So the only one that doesn't is breast. And just to give you an example of what that might mean, if you take nephrology as an example, that we would be responsible for commissioning all of the secondary care services, but if a patient progressed to dialysis or transplant, that becomes a specialised commissioning decision. And as Chair has mentioned, we've got special arrangements today to allow us to make a decision together on these proposals. On big page 93, there is an overview of the proposals, and I want to talk specifically about the General Surgical Services proposal. Initially, this included a plan to move all emergency general surgery to the Aintree site and all specialised elective surgery to the Royal site. As the planning has progressed into more of an implementation phase, it's become increasingly apparent that these proposals have potential to have wider system ramifications, particularly for NWAS and particularly for neighbouring trusts outside of Liverpool. In addition to that, there's some internal concerns about the impact on support services, radiology being an example. And for that reason, the Trust have decided to pause this element of the work to allow them to look into this further. And we will be working really closely with the Trust to ensure that these additional challenges are addressed. And when we've come to a point where they've got another proposal, we will need to take a view in partnership with our oversight and scrutiny committees as to whether we need to do further public consultation, depending on how substantially the plans change. Therefore, so for today's decision, it's the surgical specialties of upper GI, colorectal and liver that will move their elective surgery to the Royal Liverpool site, and that's detailed in paragraph 4.5. On our public sector duties, equality duties, our Cheshire and Merseyside public sector equality officers were really keen that I brought to the attention of the board that we have a responsibility to have due regard in our deliberations for this decision to eliminate discrimination and advance equality, which is why the 5 equality impact assessments are included in the full pack, starting on page 194 of your full pack. And then finally, the full business case is discussed in section 6 of the paper, and in particular draw your attention to paragraph 6.4. The capital and revenue costs for this proposal have been agreed by Luft's board, and they are all internal Luft costs within their financial plans. But we have all recognised that the beginning of this journey started pre-COVID in a very different financial climate and a different clinical climate, and a lot's happened since then. So we wanted to provide some assurance to the board that we're very cognizant of that, and that we'll be working closely with the Liverpool system to ensure that any future proposals or any developments of these proposals take into consideration the ongoing acute services review of the Liverpool system and also the Luft financial review, which is ongoing at the moment, and that they are considered in the long run within an agreed financial strategy for the Liverpool system more broadly. I'll hand over to Andrew to give specialised commissioning view on it. Thanks.
Thanks, Fiona. I'd like to start by saying a huge thank you to colleagues from the former Liverpool CCG and Liverpool Place who have done much of the heavy lifting on kind of working with the trust around the detail of these proposals. As Fiona has kind of explained in her introduction, NHS England has a direct interest in some of the services that are within these proposals. So for vascular surgery, a significant proportion of vascular surgery activity is specialised rather than ICB commissioned. For urology surgery, procedures for cancer are commissioned by NHS England as a specialised service, and for benign are commissioned by the ICB. As Fiona's already explained, for nephrology, renal dialysis and renal transplant is an NHS England responsibility currently, and other acute nephrology is ICB. For general surgery, some complex procedures, both in upper and lower GI and HPB surgery, are an NHS England responsibility, but the remainder is ICB responsibility. And then finally, for breast, there are no parts of the breast surgery service that are an NHS England responsibility. The proposals that are coming to the ICB today for decision have already been considered in principle by the Specialised Commissioning Senior Leadership Team, and I'm pleased to say, kind of having considered them, we're in a position where we feel that the proposals both hold water and make sense and are supportive of those, conditional upon what Fiona's already described within the business case, that those proposals are revenue cost neutral to commissioners, and we would also like to see work done post any decision around kind of ensuring that the benefits realisation that are described within this business case are kind of measured, and that we see kind of that those benefits kind of realised, and kind of the consequential improvements in patient care kind of delivered. So that's all I want to say. Thank you, Raj.
Thank you, Andrew. Fiona, can I take any questions and comments? Anne? Neil?
Thanks for that, Fiona and Andrew. So just a few comments on, I'll just do all the comments at once on everything, so I won't hog the microphone. So general surgery, I think it's a very good decision to pause. I think any time you move in a really mainstream non-elective specialty from somewhere to somewhere and retaining the A&E, you're going to have this problem of a whole load of patients presenting to the wrong place, the people who self-present, as well as the pressure that creates for MWAS. And obviously, some of these general surgery cases are very time sensitive. So the idea that you've got people presenting to the wrong place and then having to be transferred with all of that goes with that, I just think is a really big issue that needs to be thought through. when it's an undifferentiated specialty like general surgery is. And obviously, as the trust next door, there is also this absolutely definite issue that there will be a transference of patients to Wiston because of the shared population for some of Central and South Liverpool for sure. So that all needs to be thought through. But leaving aside that impact, I do think it's always a bit of a risky thing to do, to move a mainstream non-elective specialty from somewhere to somewhere, because people expect an A&E to be able to kind of deal with everything. You know, and it's, you know, I mean, the Royal Liverpool A&E, it's pretty major stuff. Bit disappointed in the vascular surgery list not to see Southport down as spoke to the hub. Obviously, have some problems with vascular surgery services support at Southport, and disappointed it didn't get a mention because it is actually a hub of the Lives service and should be on that list as well. And the comments about nephrology, one of the things you've said is about equitable access, and I think, you know, in a way that previous comment I've just made about vascular surgery plays into this. This issue of trying to achieve equitable access for all of Cheshire and Merseyside, or all of the trusts that these centralised services serve, is something we've just not cracked at all. You know, generally you'd find that the incidence of access to some of these services generally gets less as the further away you move. So I do think while we're considering all these issues around services at the new Lufton and where they all go to, as well as that, you know, does the geography work? We just need to think about, there's a very bold statement about making sure we've got equitable access. I'm not sure how we're going to do that, because that's something we absolutely need to keep at the top of our agenda, because we've just not got that right now. And, you know, we're here to represent all of the people of Cheshire and Merseyside, and we need to make sure that in designing these services, we begin to address this issue. It's very hard, I agree, to actually eliminate, but it's just where we are now isn't where we need to be going forward, and we need to use this new system that we're in as a real opportunity to try and sort some of these problems out, because whilst it's correct that nephrology should be centralised and correct that the specialist commissioners have got the role in dialysis, etc., it still doesn't get us to where we need to be in terms of that equity of access. It's a real problem.
Thanks. And can I ask Fiona and Andrew just to give a comment on the impact to outlying organisations like Wiston and the equity of access point that Anne made?
The impact on Wiston was one of the major considerations in the decision to pause the emergency general surgery. I think there was a commendable high level of ambition to improve services within Liverpool, but that ambition, when you get into the practicalities of it, but it's good that we do now have that wider discussion happening. I also don't know how you square the circle of getting better patient outcomes when you centralise a very specialist service with the fact that that inevitably means some people will be further away from it. And that came out in the public consultation. People are very much in favour of centralising where you get better outcomes. They understand that argument.
I'm not sure that applies to mainstream emergency general surgery.
Oh, no, not for the emergency general surgery element of it. But people generally in the public consultation will tell us that centralising where necessary is a good thing, but they want that centralisation to happen in their local area, which is a really difficult one to square. For emergency and your mainstream non-elective services, you're right. I think that's something that we can be better at now that we have a Cheshire and Merseyside footprint.
Okay, so Fiona, I think in the future we do need to hear about how we're thinking through and trying to tackle that question about equity of access. There are other regions around the country that have done it, and maybe there's some lessons to be learned from there. So if we could do that. I think it's Neil and Paul.
Yes, thank you. Just for me, I mean, it's a constant theme of mine, I'm sorry, Claire, and that's about taking tactical decisions on legacy issues without a strategic context. And if I go back and look at the Royal and Aintree merger, that was predicated on, there was clinical buy-in, and it was all self-financing and deal with the deficit. I understand there wasn't that much clinical buy-in at the time. So is the clinical buy-in for this proposal now? And secondly, in terms of the financial context, it says it's not asking the commissioners for any more money, but it is a cost to the NHS. And the Royal has got a current underlying deficit. There's another 15 services they're looking to reconfigure. So what I'd like to understand is the Royal's financial strategy to deal with this, not a cost to commissioners, but it's a cost to the NHS. If they can't deal with it, it falls on us as well. So I'd like to see this in the context of a wider financial strategy for the Royal and what else is coming downstream. And sensible it sounds, affordable it has to be also. So two questions. One, clinical buy-in, and the second is financial strategy for the Royal.
Let's bring in Graham.
I'll deal with the financial strategy question. Through the regulatory regime, Liverpool University Hospitals has been put into something called Strategic Oversight Framework Level 4. And what happens as a result of that is NHS England as a region put in place a system improvement board. The ICB are full members of that system improvement board and are working in partnership with both the region and the Royal on the improvement journey that Luft have to go through. Now, one component part of that was an independent review of the underlying financial position of Luft. That report has been received. It's been accepted by Luft. It will be reported to a future meeting of the System Improvement Board, of which we are members. Chris Douglas represents us on that meeting, and we can report that back here. But we've taken that report, which is in draft, not finalised form. Raj, as chairman, and myself have met with the chairman and the chief executive of Luft, and we have set out a number of requirements that they've agreed to, and we have set out a timetable not only for them to accept and respond to the report, but to come back to us with a multi-year strategy to achieve financial sustainability, and we've set a fairly tight deadline for them to do that. And it's not only that multi-year strategy, but it is also the mechanisms that they will use to implement that and the board assurance that is in place to know that that strategy will be effective. Now, we have set a review meeting in place for that work for the first week in December, so we will be able to report back here on the wider context after that further review that we have undertaken with the Trust in early December.
Thanks, Graham. Fiona?
Yeah, so if I could just go back to the leadership of the merger and whether there was clinical buy-in. The merger was almost entirely instigated and led by the clinicians of both Aintree and the Royal, and there is overwhelming clinical support for the approach for all of these service reconfigurations because they are all based on a case for change that is based in clinical improvements.
Thank you. If we could go on to Paul.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just interested in 5.2 about local authority overview and scrutiny. The proposals went to Knowsley, Liverpool and Sefton overview and scrutiny committees, and it says they're going to convene a joint overview and scrutiny committee. Where are we up to with that? And there are other discussions with the three authorities around these changes, and addressing particularly some of the points that Anne mentioned, and I support her comments about Southport as well, particularly as a relatively recent resident of Southport. But, where are we up to with the overview and scrutiny process?
Carol, do you want to answer that question? Because I don't know the date of the OSC. Right. So that's the final stage of the of the process, because there have been individual OSCs and then joint OSCs as we've gone through the process, because we wouldn't have got through each of NHS England's checkpoints if we hadn't done that.
Just follow up with the awkward question, Anne. Are you anticipating opposition to these proposals from any of the areas?
No, we're not anticipating. We're anticipating a good discussion, because we always get a good discussion when we go to the OSCs. But we're not we haven't had opposition to them at each of the points where we've previously spoken to them.
Thank you. Thanks. Tony?
Thanks, Raj. It's compliments on the quality of the consultation documentation. It's extensive, it's thorough, and it gets to the heart of the issues very well, and it's summarised extremely well in the report. Just trying to join up Anne's comments there about the importance of involving stakeholders, but in section 5 there are two particular issues that came out of the consultation: access to travel times and patient safety and transfers concerns that were raised. So it's very positive that you've highlighted those in the report, but I'm not clear in the report whether you've got concrete plans to deal with those issues within the change process, or whether you're going to have to implement the changes and then deal with them after the fact. I would have thought that given your strength of consultation, you could make plans ahead of the service change to try and improve that impact on patient and carer experience.
Thanks. I'll speak, but Carol, feel free to chip in, because I know this is your area of expertise, isn't it? Questions and concerns about travel is a recurrent theme in all the public consultations that I've been part of. I will certainly take back any concerns that are raised today. One of the ways that the plans from the very beginning have tried to address that is by ensuring that we maintain outpatient services locally, and the part of the service where there's travel involved is for the actual inpatient surgery stay, which in terms of the patient's entire journey is actually a relatively small part of it. And like I said, part of the query on or the reason for pausing emergency general surgery was on the transfers as well. The Trust do have a group working on feedback on transport issues. Carol, do you want to come in and add anything to that?
So that's correct, and we are working with nursing travel to look at how we can improve public transport, but some of this is also about evaluating patient experience post-change, because this might be about perception or it might be real. So I think we do need to understand what people's real experiences are, and parking, things like all of those sorts of things come into play. Some of this is about information, making sure people have the right information, but where we do uncover issues, we will engage with people to understand what they are, and we will do that, because this is generic. It's not just about these one service changes, it's about the other things that we've done recently, like stroke. So it is an ongoing issue that we are working on.
So that work will run concurrently with the implementation of the service changes, because you specifically asked about that.
Yeah, thank you.
This is beyond me, but it's a recurring theme and one thing which we should anticipate in future large-scale changes. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to move us on to the recommendations. Remember, this is a joint committee, and Andrew, I'll be get a specific comment from you. So the board is asked to approve the proposals for the 5 Luft major service changes, which are contained in the business case, as outlined in section 4 of the paper, and informed by public consultation. Happy to support that, in light of the conversations that we've just had today and the further work that we've articulated. And note the decisions of NHS England against the proposals for 4 of the 5 service areas: vascular general surgery, nephrology and urology, that are in the scope of NHS commissioning. Andrew.
So just to confirm, I think kind of our view and our decision would be that we would be supportive of the changes to the 4 services that we have commissioning responsibility for.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the work that you put in. Really, really important stuff. But as people have said, it's set lots more of this to come. Okay. And could we go on to the provider collaborative?
Yes, a great presentation just turned up. So I'm doing this presentation on behalf of the Cheshire and Merseyside Acute and Specialist Trust Provider Collaborative, which we've shortened the name of to CMAST for ease of reference. So the CMAST consists of 13 acute and specialist trusts, which is all of the acute and specialist trusts in Cheshire and Merseyside. And the group has really emerged from the hospital cell that managed the pandemic, and what we saw during the pandemic was some pretty unprecedented levels of cooperation and collaboration and mutual aid between all of the acute and specialist trusts across the patch, which was really commendable and at the time just extremely helpful. We were able to call on each other for about input into decisions, but also actually moving patients around the system, and sometimes moving clinicians around to the patients if that was a better option. So it was a very strong performance during the pandemic that we wanted to build upon as we emerged onto the problems that came beyond it, and in particular the issues of the elective recovery. Obviously during the pandemic we had a large number of particularly elective patients, but some patients who are now presenting from a non-elective point of view also that hadn't presented while the pandemic was present in our sites. So our focus as a provider collaborative has been from a kind of activity point of view around restoration and recovery, particularly of the elective waiting lists. But obviously we've also been doing a lot of work on shared vision, shared values, relationships and behaviours, so that we can build on the really positive relationships that developed throughout the managing the pandemic together. So we've implemented a programme approach where we've got various programmes in place, which I'll describe later on. Very cognizant of needing to have links into other forums, and obviously places are really an important part of our approach to our liaison with places. Then we've got lots of programme boards, we've got existing clinical networks that we're making sure we link into, and obviously a close relationship with the ICB itself. So where we are now in terms of governance is that we've got a joint working agreement which establishes committees in common, which is actually being presented to every trust board in either September or October. So we'll have some proper governance in place around how we work together and how decisions are made, and a committee established to make those decisions. So how we add value, so what's the point of the provider collaborative is elective recovery, so delivering care to our patients and our residents, being greater than some of the parts, so as we can do things together and on a bigger footprint, how we can add value. And I'm going to give closer examples of these, but things like the Cancer Alliance and the Diagnostics Programme is very much been a joint effort across the patch. A very big part of what we do is sharing, implementing and sponsoring best practice. So things like we look at the variation in something like theatre productivity, and those who do it the best go out and share that knowledge and experience and tactics, if you like, with those who struggle with it. And also we're looking very closely at clinical pathway works to make sure our clinical pathways are as less inefficient as they can be. We have got an issue with efficiency of clinical pathways because of the sheer number of trusts and the sheer number of sites, which is exceptionally large compared to some other cities that you would visit. We are also maximising our resilience, mutual aid, resource deployment. So we've got lots of things we talk about together, obviously emergency care and the Gold Command issue, how we run our elective hubs, how we run our community diagnostic centres, and also emerging discussions around how we share our workforce and the financial consequences of that. So our kind of whole focus is on how can we deliver the high quality care, best outcomes in the most appropriate location and minimise unwarranted variation. So that's where we've positioned ourselves in terms of what we're focused upon. Seem to have jumped a lot of slides there. I'm on slide 2. Is that you? You got trigger happy? Yeah. You're bored? Yeah. Sorry if I'm boring you over there. Yeah, so the next slide then, sorry, I'll have to look at slides now, was about what our priorities are. So our priorities are, reduce health qualities, improve access, stabilise fragile services. That's another one. There are a number of fragile services across our patch. That might be location-based, or sometimes it's a whole service is fragile because of usually some issue to do with shortages of workforce. Trying to improve our pathway so that they're more slick and more patient-focused. Obviously, supporting the well-being of our staff and developing more robust workforce plans is a big issue as well, and we're very cognizant of the need to do all this within an envelope of financial sustainability. So there are work programmes on that chart over there. So we didn't want to have loads of them, so we've just got 5. So elective recovery and restoration, but not just doing more of what we did before, trying to transform what we did before. So a big element of transformation within that programme. Clinical pathways, diagnostics, workforce financial management. So they're the work programmes, and each of those work programmes has got a chief executive from the patch who is the SRO, and each one has got a chair from the patch who is the sponsor of the programme. And the 3 key programmes of elective recovery, clinical pathways and diagnostics have also got a place director representative on the steering group. So our approach, next one, yeah, so this is our approach, is to digitise and innovate, increase capacity, standardise pathways, maximise productivity and share best practice. That's what we keep reminding ourselves that we are trying to focus on, and that will add the value that I described earlier. So just to give some kind of examples of that. So digitising and innovating, so we're implementing it right across the patch a new form of MRI advanced acceleration technology, which will give us a 10% increase in activity. So that's a way of increasing capacity through doing something from a digital point of view rather than a workforce point of view. We've got this risk stratification work stream, C2AI, which is to try and risk stratify the elective waiting list so that we treat patients in the right order, in effect, so that we're very clear on which patients need to be treated with priority, but also where they need to be treated. So there's a whole issue about we do need some capacity on, let me call them hot sites, where you've got all of the support services. We can't do everything on a cold elective hub. And a lot of our waiting lists are patients with complex things, with a lot of comorbidities as well. And then we've got an app for rehabilitation, so that we get patients into the best shape they can be in for their procedure, especially given some patients will have deteriorated over time whilst on the waiting list. So in the pink box, whatever that colour is, increasing capacity. So we've opened 5 community diagnostic centres now. We've generally taken the view that we should extend existing facilities to provide greater community access rather than always place them somewhere else, but that's not off the agenda. We've got 4 more to open in the next 3 years, which plans are being drawn up for. So far, and it's early days, we've done 110,000 extra tests as a consequence of the community diagnostic centres. We've opened now 1 large surgical hub already, that's at Clatterbridge on the Wirral. There are 2 additional elective surgical hubs being opened over the next 3 years, 1 in Cheshire and 1 in North Mersey. And the Cheshire one's very advanced. The North Mersey one was still really at the stage of thinking about what does that need to look like given the particular mix of patients we've got on the waiting list in North Mersey. Many of the North Mersey sites have actually got a cold site, so that kind of somewhat militates against having more cold sites, but not the case in Cheshire. lots of mutual aid going on in terms of accessing fallow theatre capacity. So there's some places where, you know, let's not build more theatres because we've got theatres that aren't being used that well now, and they're being offered up to another trust to say, you know, send your theatre team and you can use our theatres. So rather than, you know, wait to build and create new things, we're really focused on trying to maximise the use of the theatres we've already got. Just moving down to the workforce box, we've radiology is a real big recruitment problem, so we've managed to get 12 radiology recruits already signed up and offered posts on the patch. We've set up a single Cheshire Diagnostics staff bank with the implementation in progress, and that'll just be about, you know, a shared like an app, so their staff can you know, sign up to shifts in whatever trust they want to. With obviously that needs to be underpinned by the MOE for staff to work across different sites, so people aren't having to go through all sorts of accreditation processes when they work in the trust next door. So and there's lots more work to go on around these kind of shared workforce opportunities where people particularly we can avoid, you know, using the likes of agency staff. And then the box on productivity, the green box. So productivity is one of our really big agenda items. We talk an awful lot in our meetings about how we're doing on productivity across all kinds of different subjects. So colonoscopy, for example, we've used the endoscopy clinical network to share good practice, and we've set targets for individual places. So it's all about kind of supporting people to improve, not to go and, you know, beat them up or anything. We want to do this in a very positive way. And in doing that, you know, and again, this is all credit to the endoscopy network, 25% increase in monthly activity, which has happened month on month. It's not just a one-off month. So obviously colonoscopy being one of our big diagnostic bottlenecks and causing delays with the lower and upper GI cancer treatments. So echocardiography, 15% increase in monthly activity, again consistently. That's been maintained. You know, lots of help on that from Liverpool Heart and Chest, for example. And then theatre utilisation, which again is, you know, as I say, something we're constantly looking at. So next slide shows that we've gone from being in, you know, we were doing okay, so we're the black line there, and the other two ICSs, this is for Graham, in the northwest of the grey lines. And, you know, that shows that, you know, compared to the 42 ICSs in England, you know, Cheshire and Merseyside are now in the upper quartile in terms of theatre productivity. So it's just to demonstrate that obviously being able to use your theatres more productively when you've got a great big elective backlog is crucial to being able to tackle that backlog. And you know, it was kind of probably the most efficient and cost-effective way to actually deliver that additional activity is just to get more out of what we've already got before we start investing in something else. So next slide, please. So just in terms of how we've done, so that's the graph there shows the 104-week waits in Cheshire and Merseyside. So you see that huge peak that there was sort of February time. 1,200 patients have been waiting more than 2 years. And you can see that by the end of the year, well, by now, we've got down to like none, effectively. So those 60 patients that are still there, there's a story behind all of them whereby there's a patient choice issue going on where the patient actually doesn't want the procedure at this time or can't have it for some reason at this time. So in effect, although, you know, technically there are 60, there are kind of no patients who could be treated who are still waiting to be treated. So that's a big achievement to get that trajectory in place right across all of the trusts in our patch, and we're now focusing on the 78-week waits to try and have a similar impact. So as I've said, we've increased capacity as well as productivity. So we've got the Clatterbridge hub open. The Mid-Cheshire hub is on the Victoria Infirmary site, so that's on its way. And as I say, we're thinking about what to do with the North Mersey hub and what would be the ideal solution for the needs of the population of the North Mersey area. So this is an important one. You know, even with all this additional capacity, I can't stress enough, there's still a whole load of patients who need to be on a mainstream hot site, a site that's got critical care and all the things that go with it. So we can't rely on just using these elective facilities. We need to have the capacity on our acute sites, and that brings me to the issue of one of the things that we can't do and we need help with is, 20% of the beds are currently occupied by patients who don't meet the criteria to reside. So 1,000 beds on our patch have got people in them who could be cared for somewhere else. And therefore, part of our ask today is that we are reliant on this collaborative system work that we're embarking on to ensure we've got capacity to enable flow of patients and allow for the care of those patients. If you can, I'm talking about these patients who need to be on that kind of site, and that's because either they've got something incredibly complicated wrong with them that needs to be dealt with, or they're incredibly complicated because they've got loads of comorbidities. And obviously, with our deprived population, that's one of the things that is a feature, is that we have lots of patients with comorbidities that must be done on an appropriate site. So I was kind of asked to give an example of where we've sort of tried to help ourselves. So I'll give an example I was familiar with, which was one of my trusts. So we tried this scheme a couple of years ago around employing domiciliary care staff. But, the trust did it across Halton and St Helens. And we managed to, so the trust employed staff to provide domiciliary reablement, shall we say. We called it a reablement scheme. We supported in excess of 1,000 patients to return to their homes, or the home they were in, their usual place of residence. And the consequences of this was that when patients wait a long time in hospital, they often end up needing a higher level of care when they are discharged because they've decompensated while they've been in hospital. So, in a way, from a long-term point of view, it is better to be able to get this intervention sooner on. And when we did the evaluation of the pilot, we found that we'd reduced the length of stay by 22% for these patients. Readmission was decreased by 32%, and the qualitative impact on functionability, as I've just mentioned about decompensation, was improved by 56%. So it was a spectacularly successful pilot that we did in terms of the consequence for patients. But it was very destabilising of the domiciliary care market that we were very cognizant of. And I suppose it's like, I mention it here today because this is the sort of thing we just need to find a way to tackle, where we can do something good but we can't do it, and we stopped doing it because we were finding it was actually called, the repercussion of it wasn't worthy of the benefit. And so I mention it for that reason. So it's a kind of a plea that we're doing some really good stuff, but we've just got this thing that this is where we need the help from the wider system. Just the last slide then. So, concluding, we're making really good progress on our national and local priorities, really are driving down waiting lists and delivering for our patients. We've got some really, I could give you really good examples of genuine collaboration, which is helping us to deliver these results. And so we're doing what we can do, and now we just need some support from everybody else to make sure we can actually get the best solution for all of our patients and residents. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. I'm just conscious of time, and I'm going to seek just a comment from Graham about the support that's been asked. But just to say, Anne, firstly, thank you for your leadership that you put to CMAS. I'm sure it wouldn't be as successful without you, so thank you for that. And we can see here today through the presentation that some really, really important stuff is happening and we're making progress. So fabulous work, hugely important to us. Graham, just to comment on that support.
So two things. Firstly, I just wanted to say this is a substantial departure for the NHS, moving away from individual organisational silos to working together in collaboration. And what tremendous progress that we are making. And really important to say, all of those priority areas that Anne is working on with the collaborative are areas that she had agreed with me as part of that kind of overarching plan and approach. And obviously, the more that collaboration achieves, the more that collaboration will be able to do. In answer to the specific question, one, I have asked Anthony to convene a piece of work with representatives of our providers, with representatives of our place directors, to have a look at the kind of disruptive thinking that might help in the space of supplementing and supporting the domiciliary care markets, but absolutely thinking in a collaborative term when we need to reach out and put our arms around the domiciliary care market and support it, and as Anne said, not have the unintended consequence of just making the domiciliary care markets more difficult. So over the next few weeks, Anthony's going to be convening that work and kind of trying to get a bit of disruptive thinking going. And then the other point, of course, is when we understand how the £500 million discharge fund that the government wants to see us spend extra this winter, and that's the national number, our share of it. I'll have to work this out, about 4% of that number, I think. We need to put that to really, really effective use.
It's had to be really critical.
It was just to say we've just been doing some pilot work with Warrington and Holland hospitals around the VCSE role in hospital discharge and readmission prevention. It's gone really well. We're just getting to the final report findings. If we could contribute to that piece of work as well, that would be great.
Great, thank you. I'm going to take the last comment from Steve. We do need to move on.
Very brief. First of all, can I thank you, Anne, very realistic and very honest review, I think, of where we are with system cooperation since COVID. I mean, the partnership spirit certainly does continue, but just on the area around social care, I can't not sit here and not say today social care is in crisis, given the demands against resources in local government, adults, children's, and other forms of social care. And before you decide to get involved in the domiciliary care market, from the NHS point of view, I would urge you to talk to councillors about it, because obviously we're already engaged in that market. It's a difficult and very expensive market. There's issues around staff shortages. There's issues of getting people back into home and training people in homes and families up. So I think it's a big, big issue for this board to consider.
Thanks, Steve. I think we heard very clearly, didn't we, that we will be engaging with our local authority partnerships through place, led by piecework. Paul, can I just... yeah, absolutely, we really understand, I think, why this issue is both sensitive and also really, really significant to us. But we'll do it through the mechanisms that we put in place. So thanks, Anne. Can we go on, Claire? Should we go on to the assurance process for substantial change?
Yep, thank you. So this paper specifically focuses on the processes surrounding substantial change, not all the transformational activities that either is going on at scale across Cheshire and Merseyside or within the individual 9 places. It focuses on the statutory responsibilities that the ICB has inherited from the Ccgs and working closely with NHS England. As you can see in the flowchart in section 2.4, the normal determining factor as to whether something is considered as substantial change is whether the local health overview and scrutiny committees determine that public consultation is required to inform the change. And obviously now that the ICB has taken on the responsibilities from the CCG, it will be the ICB's statutory responsibility to lead and run that consultation. In the case of Cheshire and Merseyside, health review and scrutiny committees may be within either a single place footprint, place plus, or there is now a new Cheshire and Merseyside whole overview and scrutiny committee, which is being coordinated through Knowsley local authority. So we've replaced the CCGs as the organisation with statutory responsibility for that substantial change, and we have to comply with national legal requirements. But we're also working with NHS England because they retain an assurance role within substantial change. So the day-to-day responsibility for this sits within my team at the ICB, but working hand in hand with NHS England on those programmes to make sure the regular meetings, assurance checkpoints, and that's all outlined in Appendix 1. But the programmes will be and generally are led out by the place teams because they're specific to a certain provider or a certain patient catchment area. So just to take you back to 1.4, this is the list, and talking to a colleague yesterday, a potentially strange list of service change priorities that this ICB's inherited. So we've inherited these from the former 9 CCGs, all of whom probably manage service change slightly differently. So there's quite a different list there. So I think it might be for the ICB to consider whether it develops a risk stratified sort of prioritisation framework of whether all of these listed here are considered as part of a service change programme or simply as a transformation work. And I think we'd like to discuss that later. The ICB's Transformation Committee, which is one of the statutory committees that reports to the ICB, provides oversight for all of this substantial change activity and is currently overseeing some work. So it's currently overseeing a project mapping exercise across all the ICB activity around services, and that's taking place to identify if any further activities should be coming through this service change pipeline or again can just be managed through the Transformation Committee. So we're working with NHS England to look at how we can implement this properly and also working on a prioritisation model and financial framework to ensure that the schemes in this process fit with our local strategic priorities. We're also looking at the governance around this and how we work with the other 2 neighbouring ICBs in the northwest in either a committees in common or a joint committee where patient flow crosses the boundaries of Cheshire and Merseyside. All of the work within this substantial change programme is consistent with our work around equality and diversity, and Chris and I will bring probably to October or November a wider conversation around all of the EDI issues for the board. But we need to make sure everything we do about service transformation and service change fits with that EDI agenda. Just want to alert you to appendices B and C, where we've outlined the current timelines for these proposed service changes. And Appendix C is where that fits with local authority elections, local elections, because I think it's important to understand how some of these marry up and some of the consequences of some of the timelines. So that's the paper, Raj. It was just to alert the board to some of the responsibilities that we have now and going into the future, and that some of the papers we will be receiving around some of the service change. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Any questions, comments? This paper here is for note. Anne?
I confess to being the colleague that Claire spoke to yesterday. And I suppose the point I was making was that it's what a bizarre list is that, because it goes from things that are just massive and would have enormous impact to things that would have little impact on a few patients. And I'm sure there's lots more things going on than we've captured in that list. And it just seemed a bit like we needed a more structured approach to how you'd ever get on that list and whether the timescales are appropriate. Because if there's an issue, particularly around service change, where it's a workforce thing, and in a way, in the timescale that's there, it will have already gone wrong. And again, I think we should always be putting the safety thing first here. And so, where you kind of get yourself to an unsafe situation because your timescale just doesn't fit with what's triggered the problem. That's that issue, and then there's this issue about it's kind of a very bizarre kind of what some things affecting millions of people and some things affecting a few hundred people, and there doesn't seem to be a consistency around what kinds of things get onto this list and what don't. So a bit more kind of standardisation of an approach would be probably.
We just heard from Claire that she's informed the board that we will develop a prioritisation process that enables us to be more relevant in the application of those principles and timescales. And there is something that must take into account the urgency of the need from a safety perspective.
No, and I think it built on the previous conversation about inherited activity for the ICB. So we will look at this list, and that's part of the reason we're doing the mapping exercise as well, because there's so many groups, committees across Cheshire and Merseyside that have got individual work streams, so we need to see it all in one place, and then we can begin to sort of plan proactively. But I think it's important for the board that we come back with that sort of proposal around that risk stratified prioritisation framework which will sort of have to cover off all sort of the risk issues. I'd welcome that conversation.
And Claire, you mentioned that, you said that the EDI work will come back in October, November, but how about the, the worked up new prioritisation process?
Sorry, so
when will the new prioritisation process come back to the board?
I'll say November rather than October.
Okay. Good. Really, really important to us. But we need to do it in a more relevant way. I'm going to use that phrase. Thanks. Any people happy to note what's been said there? Can we go on? I think Claire, it's you again about the update of Cheshire and Merseyside People Board. Chris, is it? Sorry, I've jumped. Apologies. Go on.
So we are expecting Colin Scales as well. I think Matthew's just gone out to see if he's arrived, but I'm happy to start if you want to, conscious of time. Yeah. So thank you for inviting us to come and talk about the People Board. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background first. So the origins of the People Board started with it was a subcommittee of Health Education England. It was the local workforce action boards that was very much about receiving national funding into our regions. And the focus of the People Board was very much about how we spent that money and how we governed it to make sure that the programmes of work could actually be expanded across our system. So we stopped funding individual trusts and started to look at work across our system. And just really, the key point there is about, from the terms of reference, the board was about bringing together health and care organisations and other key stakeholders to provide that strategic leadership about the implementation of the people plan, but also looking at some of those system workforce plans. So picking up very much the comments we've heard today about this isn't organisation specific, this is about looking across health and social care and some of our wider partners.
Hi, Colin.
Do you want to pick up now, Colin? Just in the first slide.
I'm sorry, I've been out there waiting for the nod, Raj. Apologies. I'm happy to carry on now, Chris, and we had a bit of a double act to go through. So first of all, thanks for the opportunity to come and talk to you about the People Board. I do appreciate that it will be new business to many of you. And I think what Chris has probably already said is that we are in the process of trying to recast both the business and the membership of the board in order to tune into the emerging system. So what we've got here is the current membership, and I think it's really important for us to recognise the breadth of membership here and hopefully the representative nature of the membership to the system, which probably doesn't relate to many other people boards around, certainly in the Northwest. Particularly want to draw colleagues' attention to representation from local government in the widest sense, public health and adult social care, skills for care, housing associations, but also the very strong representation and engagement we have from trade unions colleagues. And Chris has done a cracking job at setting up and running the Cheshire and Mersey Social Partnership Forum, which is a really effective way of engaging with trade unions across Cheshire and Mersey, and it's co-chaired by Chris and one of their number. But it feels to me as though that body of people who clearly represent very particular interests are pointing in the same direction as the People Board now, strategically. I think that's something that we need to acknowledge and be quite proud of here.
Thanks. So we thought it would just be helpful to share with you a couple of examples. I won't go into any huge detail about these, but a couple of examples of where we've actually made some real difference. So one of our biggest programmes that we invested in was the Nursing and Midwifery programme, and we invested £500,000. It's taken a couple of years to actually really get beneath this, but what we've seen as an outcome from that is we have a Cheshire and Mersey Nursing, Midwifery and AHP charter, which really details what potential staff and our existing staff can expect from any of our providers as an employer. So that's about looking after their health and well-being, making sure they've got continuous professional development. We've developed some rotational programs that go beyond the NHS. It's not just about going from one NHS to another, but we've got tipping into primary care and social care. And it's also making sure that our students have a really good experience when they're on placement with us, which then encourages them to come and have their career with us. And we have a campaign that's called Fresh as a Daisy. It's a bit like when you have the green P on the back of your car when you've just passed your test. Our new recruits now wear a little pin badge that's a daisy, and that shows to all the staff that they're newly qualified and they might need a little bit more support. So it's making sure that they transition into our workforce. We've also been really, really keen to encourage our local youngsters to consider careers in health and social care. And we know that sometimes the educational requirements are a barrier to that. So we've been working with the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority and the Warrington and Cheshire Local Enterprise Partnerships to work with our schools and colleges, to work with our local communities. We've got lots of work placement opportunities. We've done lots of really quite creative careers events, and particularly over the pandemic, that work continued with some virtual work placements. We've worked in partnership with the Prince's Trust, and we're starting to see now the benefits of that, where youngsters are coming through and starting their career pathway. But it's important as well that we look at some new roles. So we've been working with UCLAN and our colleagues in Lancashire and South Cumbria to develop a new undergraduate and graduate programme to get people into psychological careers as well. Often there was a need for people to have done their master's degree, and that was a barrier for some people. So we saw huge numbers doing psychology degrees, many of whom didn't enter the profession at the end of that. And through Colin's organisation, we're currently developing some new roles as community health workers, and we're piloting that across Warrington and Halton. But as we've heard today, our workforce challenges are not just in the NHS. We've got lots of problems across primary care and particularly in social care. And so this year we've taken a very different view about how we allocate our funding. And we've given £500,000 to each of the provider collaboratives to develop their very specific workforce programmes, and we've given £250,000 to primary care and social care. We're also funding an educational facilitator across social care to look at how we can upskill with our partners in Skills for Care and the local authorities some of the staff and some of the future roles, particularly around the home-based care workforce. And we'll continue to bring some reports up to this group on our progress on that. This slide really just details what our priorities are for the next 3 to 5 years. I think it's been really reassuring today as we've gone through the meeting that many of the areas that we're proposing have come up as real issues and real strategic issues. So just to touch on some of them, it is really important that we have a robust system-wide workforce plan. All of our actions need to be pinned against that, but we want to take a slightly different approach in Cheshire and Mersey and make that a population health workforce plan. So we don't just see the same workforce replicated in each of our 9 areas, but we actually focus it on what are the needs of that population. And picking up on Anne's points before, also looking at what is the role of digital and technology. So we start to see our workforce change in its shape. But it's important as well that we have a greater triangulation between workforce activity, productivity and finance. So this isn't just about getting more staff in, but not seeing a shift in the way in which we deliver services. We have got to create some new opportunities. So we have a real focus now about apprenticeships, new routes into careers in health and social care, how we work better with not only higher education, but also with further education. We've put in there as well about PCN development. Often we look at roles and not look at how we sort of structure that, and that greater link between social care and primary care. Anne talked before about one of the priorities of CMAS was about promoting health and wellbeing for their staff. We have to make sure that our staff work in a good environment, that they are confident that we're looking after their health and wellbeing, that they've got a real focus about retention. Often we focus on getting people in and forget about the fact that we have a huge workforce, in particular across Cheshire and Mersey and health and social care. We have to make sure that our staff want to stay. Making sure we've got appropriate supervision and staff have got the right mechanisms to raise any concerns and be confident that they'll be raised and addressed. So maximising the value and skills of our staff. Really important factor now is we have 5 generations working together across health and social care. Those 5 generations all have very different views about what a good working environment is, what a good career pathway is. So we have to make sure that we have the facilities to allow staff to move through different career pathways, and we make sure that at different points of people's lives we offer a supportive career to them. And our final one is, I think, what you would expect and what we're starting to develop through the ICB is that positive and inclusive culture. So work inclusivity, diversity and inclusion is very much one of our priorities. And I know Colin's really keen in terms of the People Board that we have EDI representatives there that really challenge us, and every decision that we make is now viewed through an EDI lens. I think we've had some real considerable challenge, and certainly I think very often we come from a point of a lack of knowledge and appreciation of some of the EDI implications. So I'll pass back over to Colin, but hopefully I think it was reassuring for me that the points we've put in our strategy going forward have been covered through a number of discussions today.
Thanks, Chris. It's difficult to see. It's difficult to see that slide, but this is the final one, and nobody in this room needs to be reminded of just how huge the scale around workforce development and transformation is for all of us in whichever part of the system we work. Lots and lots of effort going into that within organisations and within places, and it's important to us that the People Board occupies a position of both visibility and prominence in taking that work forward, and crucially that it's seen as adding value and being relevant to partners not just within the NHS. I think typically when these sorts of infrastructure emerge out of old structures, they can sometimes be seen as pure NHS entities, and Chris in particular has worked very hard to ensure that that's not the case, but we need to continue to do that as the new system begins to find its feet and emerge. And we had some discussion at the last meeting of the People Board, which was only on Tuesday, about how we do that and begin to occupy a much more strategic position within the system than perhaps we have today, given the legacy of LWAB and lots of money to invest. So we're going to start some work over the course of the next couple of weeks to redesign, refresh the operating model for the People Board. We're going to have a look again at the terms of reference. We're going to be clear about where we need to strengthen membership, and that relates to a number of areas which I'll come on to. There's something about being really clear as to what our expectations are of members on that board, where they come from and which constituency they represent. And we need to begin to define, as lots of groups in the system are, the relationship with the ICB executive team, place teams and provider collaboratives to ensure that we're adding value and not running the risk of duplicative practice. And in particular, the membership, as I've said there, we need to make sure places feel involved. Provider collaboratives have representation by default, given the current membership, but leaders representing those bodies need to be identified and drawn in. Wider engagement with primary care, the third sector. And whilst we have good representation from our education and training providers, we don't have much of a focus from them on the development and education training of social care colleagues, and we need to correct that. So places will be working up their integrated workforce plans. It's not for us to determine what the governance needs to look like around that. Clearly those plans will describe how they will help deliver their clinical in place strategies, and we want to be part of that. We want to help and inform the development of those integrated plans without applying governance which is unwieldy and in danger of being too prescriptive. So we will continue to have operational oversight of the work that was done by LWAB. There's a lot of money to invest and action and outcomes that need to be generated through that, and we and the ICB needs confidence that that's being spent appropriately and yielding the results that we need in the system. So we're going to do some engagement over the course of the next couple of weeks with all of the people that I've described and agencies and organisations that I've described on there, hopefully to have something that effectively resets the work of the board with effect from November. That's rather ambitious, but I think we're 3/4 of the way there, both in terms of the existing people strategy, people plan, the membership and the priorities that we have. We do need to be a little more focused with our priorities, clearly. Very large list of issues on the sales on the previous slide that Chris described, and we need to make sure we're focusing on what can be delivered rather than being over ambitious. So, Chair, that's all I think we wanted to say. there's our email addresses if anybody wishes to make further contact. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Colin. Again, apologies for keeping you waiting outside. Can I take questions, comments? We've got Adam and Ian and Warren.
Yeah, I really valued his work. I think it's hugely important as we go forward. I was really pleased. I think early on in the presentation I was noting to say actually was the wider primary care engagement, so it's brilliant to see on the last slide. And if you need any hand getting in touch with the right people through the representative committees and so forth, I'm happy to be that conduit. I've got links with all of them in the primary care element. I do think we need to think really carefully around the PCN development. PCNs are at the moment solely a GP construct, and they need to be so much more than that. And we need to figure out how we build that sort of thing into that. And again, I'm more than happy to contribute to those pieces of work.
Thank you, Adam. Ian?
Thank you for the update. It was really good to see through, and I did obviously notice got public health representation on there. Just two quick questions I'm happy to take outside of here. One was around health visiting and public health nurses focus within that support. Obviously there's different models, but really good examples of that integrated local authorities responsible for our start and well services, but the majority using our wonderful NHS nurses. So a bit about that and where that focuses in. And also another good example, the University of Cheshire and our council have social care training programs in place as well. So I think just making sure that we can help link those academic institutes in there about what works well. I'm happy to support you with.
Thank you. Warren?
Thank you. Just to welcome the inclusion of the voluntary community sector in that representation. I think if there was an additional gap, it would be around carers and carer support organisations. So around 12% of the population are informal carers, and I think it would be useful to include them as part of this. Just reflecting on the video we saw earlier, without taking too much time, we saw somebody who was involved in the voluntary sector who had a training need and was being supported. So I think it's really valuable that this board is called People's Board, because it's about people delivering services for the public and health and care, not just a workforce board. So I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Warren. Any further questions? Erica?
Just very quickly, when you talked about the successes today, which were fabulous, I haven't quite got in my head the ownership and the delivery of those, and maybe there's not time for that, but how do you sort of set the strategy and it happens? I know when Anne was talking that it was very clear who the ownership was, yeah.
So, and I'd like to come back to the question of health visiting, skilled nurse and children's services if I could very briefly, but we have a really clear governance model supporting both the investment process of decision making and the scrutiny of all of the areas where we're investing our resources, with SRO responsibilities for the individuals or organisations that are taking those programmes of work forward, and a requirement to report routinely into the board on progress against their pre-identified actions. So the governance, clearly it doesn't come across here, but the governance associated with that investment is, in my experience, exceptionally tight, and I think we have a lot of confidence that that's managed very effectively. Happy to share any further detail in terms of the range of schemes, because that's just a flavour and precisely how they're taken forward, if you wish, offline.
Thank you. You wanted to make a
Just in terms of the health visiting, school nursing, the wider children's public health business is absolutely on our radar. Many of us responsible for delivering that service are cited on, as in many other professions, some of the deficits and pressures associated with the number of staff in those professions who are nearing retirement age, and the very limited number of people who are choosing those professions as a career going forward. So it's part of the work of the provider collaborative, Community Mental Health Learning Disability Collaborative, and it will feature in the business of the People Board going forward, both in terms of the collaborative responsibility, but crucially its connection with the wider population health work that we're taking forward.
Thank you. Graham?
I commend the work of the board, and I commend the approach to bring it together in the way it's been done. I think we have to look really carefully at the ladder, you know, all the way through from when you first excite somebody about a potential career in health and social care, all the way through to when they get that first career step, to be able to progress and continue to progress. This has to sit at the heart of all of our regeneration strategies that want to see people within the Cheshire and Merseyside region have access to better jobs, better household income. But of course what you can't do is you can't have a board with so many partners on it that the board doesn't become a board, it becomes a kind of conference. Now, I went to a regional meeting as a forerunner to this, where Skills for Health, and I'm saying this for a reason now, Skills for Care just brought one FE college along to the meeting so that we had got one FE input. Now, for the whole of the Northwest, the college that Skills for Care chose to bring was the Hugh Baird College from here in this part of the world, because of the exemplary work that they are doing in terms of getting young people into careers in care. So we can't have 20 FE colleges on this board, but we really do need to think about how we draw that ladder all the way through, from how you first excite young people about potential careers and develop them. And then just one final, which might be a more obscure point, and I'm not proposing, or I don't think I'm proposing, that they should be on your board, but there is at least one private university operating within Cheshire and Merseyside who have managed to recruit medical students and are placing those medical students into NHS trusts in our patch. So how, if at all, are you working with the one private university that I know is on our patch? There may be more.
I think Chris is indicating to give a response.
We have the elected representative and giving a presentation from them on Tuesday. So the the University of Chester actually have a representative seat on the board. They represent all of the universities in our area. And as colleagues, a part of our work now is making sure that we've got the right mechanisms to get the key messages from the board across all of those partner organisations and then back through to the board.
Thanks, Chris. Just a couple of things if I could ask you to consider this. It makes me anxious when I look at our board assurance framework for the ICB, because what we don't articulate in that board assurance framework is the traditional people's board, which you're having your trust and so on and so forth. But what we do have is what we've just heard today, which is, I think, an exemplary approach to partnership working across the multiple agencies that need to be involved in driving that people question across health and care. There's a but for me. I think in executing the ICB responsibilities on behalf of the system, as you're working through your new model, we have to clearly describe how that links in with the ICB and how, I guess, what the accountability arrangements are. So if you could give that thinking, and obviously, Colin, I know you're thinking of this, and it's clear in your presentation, is what's the added value to the people board at the Cheshire and Merseyside level? Because you could argue that the multiple people boards that are in our organisations are doing the same job, but what's the added value across Cheshire and Merseyside? We know health education in England is changing significantly. It disappears very soon, and some of the budgetary responsibilities are up for grabs. It'd be really good for us to think through and be proactive about putting our own view about what would be good for Cheshire and Merseyside and the NHS and care sector as that change develops. I'm looking at Graham. If you know anything more about that, it'd be good to hear about that. And the third one is, and it will be part of the governance question I've asked you about linking with the ICB, is we do need to see data. This is probably the single people, the workforce people, are probably I'll use that in the pluralistic sense, the single most important and probably biggest risk or significant risk that we face in terms of trying to deliver population health improvements. That needs to be data informed. So those three things are really important. Happy to hear if any immediate comments, Chris and Colin, but I'd like it to come back on a reasonably regular basis to this board.
Yeah, I mean, we'd certainly appreciate having the opportunity to come and talk to you about the progress we're making, Chair. In a couple of months' time, we should be in a position to describe the refreshed approach and the question of accountability and governance that you quite rightly mentioned there is going to be central to the work we do over the coming weeks. I did indicate on one of the slides there the fact that the relationship not just with the ICB and the executive team and the ICP and wider partners, but also the connection with place and the expectations of places and individual organisations needs to be very clearly described in the output of this work. And hopefully when you see it, you'll take the opportunity to incorporate into your BAF as necessary. In terms of data, we've got bundles and bundles of data, and we can bring examples of that perhaps next time we talk to demonstrate how we're making progress against those key strategic priorities. I think the collection and management of that through Chris's office is pretty effective and gives us good confidence and identifies where the deficits are. So we can share that. We're certainly not light when it comes to data and support to evidence-based decision making.
Thank you. Oh, thanks, Colin, for the leadership that you're putting into this. I know you've got a busy job. You're welcome to stay, but
I'll head off.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. Good to see you.
Thanks. So can we go to agenda item 12, Developing Cheshire and Merseyside Integrated Care Partnership? Thank you, Claire.
Thank you. So this paper provides an update to the ICB board members about its sister board, the Integrated Care Partnership, and the progress being made to establish it. I think it's worth saying we're not starting from scratch. We have had the Healthcare Partnership for a number of years now, so we're building on the excellent progress that's made to develop the ICP. So the exec summary and background set out the national guidance through the 2022 Health and Care Act for establishing integrated care partnerships in each of the 42 ICSs nationally. It's a statutory committee between the ICB and the local authorities who are known as the founding members. It's a multi-partner committee focused on the wider determinants and responsible for overseeing the development of the system's integrated care strategy and various other things which you can see in the paper. As I say, it's going to be known locally as the Healthcare Partnership because that is a well-recognised, respected brand and builds on all the work that's happened over the past few years. I think it's important, 1.7, to state that this isn't a new standalone, it is a new standalone committee, but it's not the only committee in Cheshire and Merseyside that focuses on health and well-being. It's at scale, but I think it's worth saying there's some fantastic work that's been going on for many, many years, but this is a statutory requirement for Cheshire and Merseyside. Looking at 2.3 and 2.4, these are the current healthcare partnerships, vision and mission statements, and we discussed these at a workshop last week, and I think the view for those who were there that it seems about right in terms of vision and mission. And rather than spend too long trying to create another sort of list of words, we'd go with those for the time being and we'd sort of build on those through the work of the board. So we had a workshop last week for founding members. Unfortunately, not everyone could make it, but for those who were there, we discussed, as outlined in 2.8, a suggested work programme for the Healthcare Partnership. You can see it there in terms of the strategy that has oversight for that. Obviously, environment, communities and population health, key focus for the ICP, anchor institutions, sustainability, place development, and probably very pertinent for the moment, sort of cost of living crisis and winter. So they're the proposed priorities for the HCP, and we've got the first formal meeting in November and we can sign those off. So where are we now? As I say, we're building on good work from the past number of years. But we need to formally establish the Healthcare Partnership, Integrated Care Partnership for Cheshire and Merseyside. So in terms of founding members, as I say, that's the local authorities, and it's either the leader of the local authority or the chair of the Health and Wellbeing Board. They've been nominated by each of the local authorities, and Raj, the chair, as the representative from the ICB. It's through a number of conversations, I think, between Graham and Raj with the local authorities over weeks and months, It's been proposed that a local authority political leader is the chair of the ICP, and nominations were made over the summer, and Louise Gittins from Cheshire and Chester was the nominated local authority leader to chair the ICP. We have to formalise that designate position with all of the local authorities. That's the proposal. We've also proposed that the ICB founding member, Raj, would be one of the vice chairs. And it's also proposed that we have a joint vice chair with a representative from the voluntary sector. And it was agreed at the workshop last week that we would have a formal process, an open process for appointing that person. So we'll be running that in the next few weeks, and hopefully we'll have somebody in a designate position for the first meeting in November. So it was just really to inform the board of the progress being made. Obviously, in terms of engagement with the wider community, this isn't the only thing we're going to be doing as an ICS. We are looking to have sort of wider assembly with partners, and obviously the framework that we signed off at the July board in terms of engagement with population and the communities will build on that. So you can see in 3.14 in terms of next steps, it's about formalising the designate position of Louise Gittins as chair, and then noting all the progress that's being made. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Any questions or comments? Paul and Steve?
Well, thank you very much, Claire. Really good progress and development and evolution of this. On page 338, the diagram, which is really good to see that the whole of the ICS is built on the foundation of patients, place and system. Thank you for recognising the role of local government and the democratic element in the development of this work. One question, when will the integrated care strategy actually be published? And what's the process for its development, evolution and consultation?
Okay, so we have to publish the integrated care strategy by Christmas, by December, but the guidance is quite vague, if I'm honest, Stephen, on terms of the detail of that strategy. So obviously we're building on work that's already taken place, and we want to build on the health and wellbeing strategies of each of the local authorities in terms of sort of the place element and the place chapter. So we'll be bringing a paper next month to the board around the next steps, and we'll be bringing it to the first ICP meeting in November, and then we'll have to work out through the ICP how we sign that off, and we'll formalise it here in December. But we'll work with our existing place partners through the health and wellbeing boards in particular in terms of engagement with the wider communities in place.
Thank you. Steve? Sorry, the wrong person. No, Steve. I've lost my list. Who was next? Paul. Apologies, yeah.
We're actually, I think, way ahead of quite a lot of areas on this. An event in the local government association in London years, and I was amazed to see how far ahead we were. I know some concerns were expressed about some of the administration, which you mentioned about the exam. I think if you could, with good notice, make sure that we've got the right people there and that educators know about these issues.
comments about how ICB and HCP will work together?
I can do. I'll give it a go, and I'm sure others will want to say something. So just firstly, I suppose on the query about timings of meetings, I think we'll get all that forward plan sorted, and I think Raj and I are meeting with Louise hopefully next week, and I think that will be sort of the catalyst in terms of how we sort of move this forward together. And obviously with Louise chairing it, I think we'll get some impetus behind it and get things moving. That's why I wanted to bring it today, because it's so important that the ICB is seen as very much as the sister, the parallel board in the system. So I think it's for the agenda setting in terms of the priorities that are listed in the section. I can't see now where it is. That they're key priorities for the whole system, not just for the ICB. It's for the ICP and all the partners. So I think it's about how we work together, how we hold each other to account. And you'll have some officers will sit on both boards. And we have to hold each other to account, I think, through the place directors as well. I think that's a really good way to introduce that sort of place agenda into the ICP work and into the ICB. But I think it's early days, and I think we'll work that through with Louise and yourselves.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Claire, for that update. And from a local health watch perspective across Cheshire and Merseyside, we welcome the kind of local determination around the membership and hope that Health Watch can be part of that. We know you're coming to talk to us as well in a few weeks, so that's maybe something we can pick up.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, when we were looking at the list of attendees and members, committee members, Health Watch is actually on there. I guess we just have to, I suppose, Raj's point in terms of the people board, how many we have on behalf of, and I think that's what we have to do in terms of the size and scale of Cheshire and Merseyside. We have to have organisations talking on behalf of each other.
Thank you. Good point. Okay, if there's no further comments, we can see this paper's been put here for notes, but there are a couple of things that we would seek the ICP approval and support, ICB approval and support for. One is the appointment of Louise Gittings into the chair role. Happy to do that, and also the structure around the two vice chairs. Good, thank you. Thanks, Claire. If we can go on to the ICB key update reports. Claire, Finance.
Yes, thank you. So colleagues will have had a chance to read the paper, so I'll just summarise where we are and then pull out three points, if that's okay, Chair. We have reported a £45 million deficit to the end of month 5 against a £32 million plan, so you'll see that that's a reported variance in the year to date of just over £13 million. We are still forecasting, though, that we'll deliver our plan, which was, as you remember, a £30 million deficit. So the three key points I'd like to just draw out, and then I'll open it up to questions, is firstly, the simple maths of that will demonstrate that a £45 million deficit in the first 5 months, but a forecast to deliver a £30 million deficit by the end of the year, contains within it some really ambitious improvements to our run rate that are assumed within our plan, and will need some real focused efforts over the remainder of the year. And that brings me to point number 2, which is that our plans have some really challenging cost improvement targets and efficiency assumptions within them. We are currently still forecasting across the whole system within individual organisations and for the ICB's own position that those CIP plans will be delivered by the end of the year, but at least 50, or almost 50% of those are being identified as being delivered non-recurrently. So that is an area of concern for us in terms of our financial sustainability going into the future. And I think it's also true to say, as you can see from the report, that there are some organisations that are really struggling to pick up the pace on this, and it needs to be a really big focus for everybody over the rest of the financial year. And then the third thing, just to draw your attention to the risk sections highlighted in the report. We need to develop our risk reporting as a system to be able to provide something more comprehensive over future months and future reports. But at a high level, within providers, we've got a risk, an unmitigated risk of 73 million, which is currently not in our forecast. Now, that doesn't mean to say that that will all materialise, because that's why it's not in the forecast. It's a risk. An unmitigated risk at this stage, and it's still being managed. But there are some real challenges out there in the system, and you'll see from the paper some of the things and the conversations that we've been having with organisations, both Graham and myself over the recent months, to support and understand those challenges. I'll pause there for questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Questions, comments for Claire? Anne, and then Neil.
I mean, clearly, when you look at a figure that's forecast for the whole year, and we've already got there by now, you know, you mentioned the ambition that is required in terms of things like cost improvements. I mean, you know, given the amount of insight or not that you will have into what those plans are, I mean, how credible do you think they are in terms of the kind of hope, which is a bit weak, isn't it? Having a hope that it kind of writes itself. I mean, you know, what's your view on whether or not these plans that these trusts and other organisations are still saying will deliver what we need to deliver, that they are actually credible and will actually have the required impact?
So if I'm thinking about just this year's plans, which I think is your question, I think that there are a small number of organisations, 2 or 3, that I think are really going to struggle to hit their plan and probably won't at this stage, is my assessment. And I think there is a heavy profile given the non-recurrent nature of some of the improvements or some of the transactions, which probably will only be done towards the end of the financial year. That skews the profile a little bit. But, you know, I do share, you know, what was inherent within your question there about that concern. I think there are 2 or 3 organisations that are some way away at the moment from providing adequate assurance. There are some organisations that have got a variance to plan in the year to date that the reviews that we've done would suggest that whilst challenging, those plans are still deliverable. And I think that Luft is one of those, for example. We've obviously done a lot of work, deep dive into that position. I think their financial sustainability and their position for next year is a major concern. But in terms of delivery this year, I think that we are receiving assurance, and it does seem to be backed up by the evidence that that is deliverable this year.
Thank you.
I mean, I would just add, there's obviously winter to get through, and there's a couple of organisations with big fuel and energy issues, and inflation generally, and who knows, given this week's, you know, so it's all heavily caveated, but, you know, of the 5 year to date, 2 or 3 will struggle.
Thanks, Claire. Neil?
Yeah, I think it's a good report, Claire. I think you reflected the situation pretty well. I think we're ready to a bit of headwind and uncertainty. But I suppose my theme is this is a tactical year we've got to get through. But the theme for me is very much about that strategic context. Non-recurrent savings on CIPs going into next year. What is the underlying position of the system? And when I look at this report, and when I look at the performance report, which is based on single indicators, there's a theme there, and this theme is about particular organisations that are struggling. And I think we need to understand the organisations, both in terms of the service delivery, the financial aspect, and the underlying position, to see how we support them, or how we help boards to take on the responsibilities and discharge it properly. People don't like the term performance management, but we need to make sure that we help those who need help, and we help those who can help themselves. And I don't get a context yet for that, but just looking at single indicators on performance and on finance is one thing, but if you pull them together, there's particular organisations which have got particular issues, some part of the service reviews that are taking place, so we need to pull all this together so that we can triangulate the underlying position and what impact the collaboration is going to have in terms of service reconfigurations and what these long-term standing issues are. So this year I accept it's tactical. It's a bit of, you know, fingers crossed. Feels risky, but from how you outlined it, I don't think you put it any better at this point.
Really, really important. Claire, can I suggest that at a future board meeting very soon, we talk about a financial recovery regime and what your thinking and approaches to that are going to be to that pointedly go to the really important issues that Neil's just raised. Is that sensible?
Absolutely.
Yep. Is that okay? No, we'll come to that next month. Hugely important. Steve?
My pleasure. Very, very comprehensive. Just on page 345, 346, you list 5 providers who have got some issues around financial risk. And what I'm concerned about is the Countess of Chester. Is it something we need to give as a board a particular attention to, or is it being managed? And second point, the deficit of 30 million, which is the plan one, looks somewhat optimistic given the events of this week. Would you agree?
Should we, Graham, do you want to say something about Countess of Chester and that second question?
So I think the Countess of Chester is, if you take Neil's wider question, an organisation that we're concerned about at lots of levels. And indeed the CQC have told us that they are inadequate for well-led. Now, of course, that organisation is going to make a number of investments to try and secure a better framework, but it can't spend somebody else's money. You know, the money that is allocated to it is the money that is allocated to it, and other organisations are able to deliver within those same constraints. So they're not classified as a soft 4 organisation, they're only classified as soft 3. There is an improvement board in place which is co-chaired between ourselves and the region. The difference with soft 4, the region lead it. Soft 3, we do it together. And there is a governance review in place that will report probably within a fortnight now. And we have arranged through our offices a variety of support. So there's an improvement director that the region have put into the organisation. There's some additional financial support for the programme management of their cost improvement programmes that Claire has arranged to go into that organisation, and a variety of other support packages in place as well. Turning to the wider point that Steve has made, there is just such a significant level of uncertainty. It's quite interesting with the, Raj's challenge to people to be brief. I'm sitting here looking at Claire's notes, and one of the things that she's written down but not mentioned is the elective recovery fund. Now, the centre of the NHS has paid over to all of our organisations all of their elective recovery funds for the first 4 months of the year, even though they haven't actually met the targets that were set out for that elective recovery fund, because of well-known circumstances, the resurgence of COVID and other pressures. So there's a number of flexibilities still in the plan that have to play through. Thanks, Graham. Claire, was there anything further you wanted to add?
Well, I mean, just to add to what Graham was saying about the general improvement work and the support at Chester, I do share your concerns about the financial forecast of that organisation, and so they are one of the organisations that we are, identify as very high risk for delivery of plan, in answer to Anne's question. And completely accept your second point about volatility of markets at the moment and inflation. We're seeing some big issues, not only in revenue, but also our capital projects, which are really problematic, which I know you'll be living and breathing as well, but I completely agree.
Thank you. Okay, paper here for noting. People note that, and critical action item for next board meeting, which is our approach to financial recovery, our general approach to financial recovery. Thank you. Can we go on to the quality and performance report, Chris?
I think it's myself to lead on that first one, isn't it,
Okay.
Chair? Yeah. So if I can start, Chair, by just explaining the first couple of slides within the pack. Some of the people around the table right now will remember, whilst we were in shadow form, that we signed off a 22-23 operational planning plan, which incorporated a number of key metrics, finance, workforce, etc. And this was probably the summary of the risks that we saw at that time in terms of the delivery during 22-23. The following letter that you see in the pack, which we were asked to share with boards, is the NHS England response to that plan. Some of the continued ask that they would expect through the year, and there is a review process in line with how we explain how we're doing against that, and also have the ability to showcase some of the good work that we've seen around this table this morning. The next session for that is the 28th of October. It may be useful, given that a number of people around the table will not have been there when we had the sign-off, that we offer up the opportunity to have maybe a recap of what the content of the 22-23 was ahead of what will become the new one, which we believe will become from December. In terms of 23-24, there's also an indication that it could be a 2-year time frame as opposed to a 1-year time frame. So maybe I could do a separate briefing outside of here if you would wish. I think there's a couple of comments have been made on the table really. If we look at the pack as it stands now, I think we recognise that it's an iterative process in terms of the development of this report, and we've been doing that particularly in consultation with the Quality and Performance Committee. And we know this isn't quite has the right appropriate content format or necessarily scope in some cases, and we're working on that at the moment. And I think we're probably in a position now where we can probably offer some commitment to the board to be able to show by this time next month a significant step forward in the presentation and content of this report. And it will still reiterate as we go through it on then, but I think we can show a marked change. I wasn't proposing to go through what I accept is a very extensive range of single indicators, as Neil has mentioned, but I think when we listen to the comments that have been made throughout the course of this morning, I think everyone's recognised some of the real operational and clinical challenges that we're facing right now in the system. And where we've heard that in some detail, particularly around the acute sector and non-criteria to reside challenges, I think some of the indicators that you see in front of you would demonstrate that that pressure is being felt similarly across all sectors. I think every sector would be able to lay their hands on one or two key indicators which would demonstrate that demand is up for them, whether that be primary care, mental health services, social care, and we certainly need to get more extensive into the world of public health, which I know certainly Rowan is very keen to progress with us. I wasn't necessarily going to comment on individual elements, as I said, but what I would say is, we've sat and listened to some of the pressures. We've commented a number of times that winter's coming, and that will only exacerbate the current situation. But I think it was encouraging to hear Deb's mentioned in her earlier presentation the priority that's been given across place and providers to the development of winter plans. And those winter plans came together at the start of this week into a uniform ICB winter plan, which we've submitted onwards to NHS England. We're now going through the stages of looking at the approach that's being taken across the 9 areas and focusing on some of the areas that would appear to offer up the most impact so that we can share them across that wider footprint. There's a similar approach being taken in the Northwest. There's an event next Friday where a similar approach is being taken. We have got good representation at that session from every provider and every place and every sector at that session. And we heard earlier Graham mentioning some of the stuff that we're trying to do, particularly around the thorny issue of domiciliary care, social care, the interaction with NHS. So I'll pause at that summary if that's okay, but happy to drop into any line of questioning should there be any.
Thanks, Anthony. So just a reminder, work in progress around this report. It's really important, isn't it, that we have data that's turned into intelligence to help this board understand how we're doing against our accountabilities, and that's more of the work in progress, I think, is what you're saying. A lot of information here then. Any questions, comments that really jump out for me? So we'll go with Erica and then Tony.
Just really quickly, the one that stood out to me was the positive action on health and well-being. So, yeah, I think we're sort of 56%, and I know as a collective we're all trying, but that's kind of the reality. And I know there's a staff survey due, isn't there, as well? It was just whether there was any comment, Chris, on how you felt about that.
Restrooms, etc., that have been repurposed from the offices. Some of that's gone back, so there is a focus on those. We've still got some of our national funding, so we'll do that strategy
people that want to use them. So.
Can I just add to that? I was going to share, I got that point as well, because again, the correlation with two particular organisations, you lose your staff, you lose the culture, and those two are struggling again. So it's not just about financial and service recovery, this is about staff support and recovery. If you put all these indicators together, we've got some really difficult challenges in some organisations to address, and that staff is so important.
Thanks.
This week, making sure that the offer is accessible to all staff. It's one thing having an offer, it's to make it accessible and useful for staff.
Thanks, Chris. Tony?
Just to support Anthony's comments there about the development of this process of reporting in the right way about the right things to the board, and also providing accountability to the board and also to partners and public. So all the data is there that we need, but the two key elements that we're working on that will happen in the Quality and Performance Committee are triangulation, matching the data with other intelligence. And it was encouraging for me to see at the last Quality and Performance Committee reports from place quality committees highlighting areas that you could see reflected in the data. So there's a good opportunity there for us to develop that skill. But accountability, I think, is really important. The sentinel metrics, we're going to remain watching those because that's what we've planned for, that's what we're accountable for. But the board summary report, which is that very brief one, I think it's around page 150, is really important, but it lacks, we've already discussed this with Anthony, the key elements. It says what the metric is, what the issues are, what the mitigating actions are, what we need to add to this is, and have they worked, as evidenced in the data. So we've got the capacity with the data and the processes in the Quality and Performance Committee to deliver this. So what we'll hope to deliver, delete that word hope, what we will deliver is a more concise approach that provides good assurance through triangulation with all the intelligence we've got.
Thanks, Tony. And I think implicit in that, Tony, is a clear line of sight to our overall strategic objectives. Thank you. Okay, any other further comments, questions on this? I might be pulling this data from the wrong section. What stuck out a mile for me was the number of people with LD and the health check percentage, which was, I've lost my note, was it 6% against the national 25%, which is low. And for those of us who have been around for a while, we know what the history there is.
I think, Chair, that's reflected in a later report on my feedback from the committee. So if you
should we come to that then? Thank you. Okay, for noting, let's move on then to is that Director of Nursing report?
Thank you, Chair. So this is the first of the Director of Nursing Care report. It's to provide assurance to the board on areas around quality, safety and patient experience for services commissioned and provided within Cheshire and Merseyside. So the paper is for noting. I just wanted to bring the board's attention to two documents that have been published recently. The first one being a review of an independent service that was commissioned from NHS England, which is there detailed in the report, which was the one-to-one midwifery, which was just, when this paper was written, was embargoed, but has now been published. And the second is the Joint Targeted Area Inspection, which was published on Monday of this week, which was an inspection focusing on Cheshire East Children's Safeguarding Partnership, involving the inspectors from Ofsted, Her Majesty's Inspectorate and the Care Quality Commission. I just wanted to inform the board that both of the documents will be going through the Quality and Performance Committee in October, and specific to the one-to-one midwifery review, the Quality and Performance Committee will review the recommendations on what they mean for us as an integrated care system when considering future contracts from independent providers, and also monitoring of existing independent contracts from independent providers. The Joint Harvest Area Inspection, again, will be brought to the October Quality and Performance Committee with, we'll present and share the findings with the recommendation and the progress on actions that have been taken to date. And I wanted to highlight the development, as Tony's just said, around the quality surveillance and oversight within Cheshire and Merseyside ICB, with the development of the Quality and Performance Committee. And as Anthony referenced, there is an iterative process in how we develop that, but there's been 3 meetings that have been held which have been quite productive in looking at how quality and assurance is measured and monitored across the system. We've also got in there within the Quality and Performance Committee, the place reports, as Tony's just referred, which shows the development of quality and committees at place and how we escalate key issues within the system. There's also the establishment of the System Quality Group, which is a strategic forum for partners within Cheshire and Merseyside to join up around common priorities. And this has met once previously before I was in post, but I have been informed that it was extremely informative and well received. And we've got future dates planned for the System Quality Group in the coming year, with discussion areas already identified and agendaed. So I'd just like to ask that the board notes the contents of the report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Questions, comments? Good report, thank you. Should we go to agenda item 16, report of the Chair of Audit?
Thank you, Chair. Just a few comments quickly. I mean, the paper's there for members to have read. I mean, the first meeting was very much about a range of governance issues and legacy issues and the handover from CCG. I'm pleased to report that MIA, who audited all these previous CCGs, have given a good assurance in terms of the closure of CCGs, and so well done to the CCGs with those. There's no significant outstanding actions. I think also just to point out that with the changes and the new audit contract, I think we've saved something like about £450,000, so that's a good benefit to the system. Much of it was then about the audit plan, the counter fraud plan for this year, and signing off important policy documents, and they're listed there, item 6.1, with recommendations to the board, if the board are happy to accept those recommendations.
Comment? We are? Yep.
Okay.
Thank you, Neil. Any questions on the remaining papers? No, thank you. Should we go to Tony, quality?
Thank you very much. Very challenging area to develop as quickly as we have, so thanks to everybody that's been involved in that. Yeah, the report sets out the issues that we looked at and the areas that we raised concerns, so I'll not dwell on those too much. But to pick up on the 3 areas that I think we dealt with in depth, which was the report on the GP survey. So we had an extremely good discussion about the GP survey. And it's safe to say that the report, as it says there, we are not performing much worse than anybody else, but that's not a place that any survey would want to find us in. There are some areas for improvements, particularly around, as we mentioned earlier on in the meeting, about initial access to practice came out very strongly. So what we'd do with that is we'd expect to hear more from place quality and performance committees about the improvements that are being made with particular practices and primary care networks that are severely challenged. So this will set up an important flow of information backwards and forwards to the committee from the place committees. We looked at the quality and performance dashboard, and I think we've covered that well enough with the discussion with Anthony. The 2 issues that we considered for escalation particularly, as you mentioned before, Raj, the annual health checks for people with a learning disability. We received a very excellent presentation from Pauline McGrath on this that allowed us to dig into this in some considerable detail, and we understand that as it stands at the moment, the rates are particularly low, but this isn't unusual at this time of the year because for historical reasons a number of the annual health checks take place towards the year end. So we'd expect to see a natural improvement there, but we have registered significant concern that these are, and it's not for the first time we've said this, not satisfactory. So we'll expect to see more feedback on that, and again it'll be very much down to place to be able to feed into the Quality Reforms Committee about practices that need extra support, particular challenge, and that again keeps this process going. The other one was we received a report there, as you can see, which was very significant on sickle cell. The No One Is Listening inquiry is a very challenging report to read. We've included it in the body of the ICB's report. It's challenging when you read it, and it's challenging when you think about it even more. It's a particular concern. So again, we had what was a relatively brief conversation, but we want to bring it to the attention of the board. What's expected is that the integrated care system produces a report in response to this. But our question is, and it's Chris's challenge I think, is should this become a priority for the integrated care board and take the leadership on there to make sure that there's a full response to this report. From my point of view, if you'll bear with me, in the report, on the, probably the second or third page, there's a summary just in 5 lines of the negatives that were found in the report. The lack of prioritising, the inadequate funding, the lack of joined-up services, but I think we could approach it in a much more positive way by turning those phrases around and saying what we want to see is the opposite of that in Cheshire and Merseyside, and make that, if you would permit us, a plan that we follow through and hear further developments at the Equality and Performance Committee.
Thanks, Tony. Any questions and comments? No, so a couple of comments, or maybe one is on learning disabilities. So thank you for escalating that through the committee. I would like to see that coming back here when through the committee, of course, with the key risks and with the progress that's being made. So if you could note that. And the other question is about Nobody's Listening report and sickle cell. We need a process by which we determine how we're going to react to that and the priority that we place on that. Who, what? How does that happen? Graham, I'm looking at you for advice.
I think in the same way that you have asked Claire to come back and present what our approach to financial sustainability and our financial intervention regime would be, it is a priority and an objective of our medical director to set out very clearly what our clinically led improvement regime will be as well. And it will be through that process we'll be able to say there should be a clear priority setting process that enables us to do that.
Okay, thank you. And is there a role for CMAS in that, given the emphasis that was on providers?
Sorry, I was just looking at what the incidence of sickle cell disease is, because I was just thinking, how many of those patients do we get, you know? So it's not a great incidence, so it needs to be, I think, something on a fairly big scale to think about what it looks like. So certainly, we've got clinical pathway people, so I think I'll get our lead on clinical pathways to liaise with Rowan and see what we need to do to make things better.
Thank you. Lauren?
It was just to pick up, there was the conversation earlier around access issues around Luft, which we agreed was much wider. And you know, core 20+5 is supposed to be the equality strand of this, and I don't want to steal the thunder off the Integrated Care Partnership. It's great that these were picked up by the Quality Audit Committee, but it's thinking through how we're a bit more methodical about some of these equalities issues and how we report back here on.
Yes, that's the need, isn't it? And I think that's Graham's core point as well, is we need to get our heads around that and come back here and discuss it. Okay, thank you. Erica, Primary Care Committee.
So this is lastly and certainly not least, so this is the System Primary Care Committee. So it's our role to oversee and promote the best practice commissioning, and that's across GP, primary, medical services and also community pharmacy. Just want to add to what Graham was talking about. You'll see within the papers is the start of the process and the due diligence, get the right D's out, to take on both dentistry and ophthalmic in April. And this is all around understanding the base, what are we taking on so that we can then look at targeting the right sort of priorities. So that's one of the documents in there. So there was various matters considered, which probably the standout one was looking at the progress so far on place-based primary care, the operating models and national and local contracting. I'm going to ask Claire, I'm going to be very quick, I'm going to ask Claire to come in at the end because some progress has been made since the committee. Action plans on GP surgeries, Pharmaceutical Services Committee and also 2 updates. Decisions were made on 3 individual things at place and also the dispute resolution process. And you'll see in the papers we are here asking for recommendations on amendments to the terms of reference. So that did come in front of you quite rightly on the 1st of July. I think with most of these terms of reference, we're now getting more clarity to make sure that they're workable and everyone understands them. So I'm just going to hand over to Claire because there's just 2 points I wanted to comment on, and that's progress on the primary care op model. And the second one is the interim virtual agreement we've put in place.
Okay, thank you. So the System Primary Care Committee meets bi-monthly. And we agreed, so I'm doing this back to front, so we agreed that we would review some escalations virtually, and we're doing that currently. So we've got a couple of items that we're in discussion with, which the closing time is 5 o'clock this afternoon. So the committee members have been asked to inform Erica as chair with their views on these recommendations that have come through from place. So I think on that, currently the proposal was when we started as an ICB in July was to have a System Primary Care Committee and 9 place primary care committees. We are in discussions with the place directors and places whether we actually have the 9 place primary care committees or whether primary care decisions can be taken within the delegated authority and operational working of place directors but through formal committees, so not the place director on their own but as part of a committee structure. So we're having conversations around that and how that would work in reality, and we'll bring a recommendation to the System Primary Care Committee at its next meeting. But I think that would expedite some of the work. What we don't want to do is delay anything, because some of the decisions around primary care are really, really critical and they almost have to be made as we go along. So that's a proposal we're looking at, and we'll bring a recommendation to the System Primary Care Committee. But the place directors are supportive of that, as long as we make sure those decisions and those discussions take place in an open forum and there's the right sort of competency and advice for that. So as Erica says, and then we're working as a System Primary Care Committee virtually to make sure nothing gets delayed. So I think, was that it? Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
So that's great news. Just in terms of that committee, it would be, I've got 2 questions. One, it would be great for that committee.
So I think in terms of voluntary sector, I think we should probably agree with that, and we'll take that as a recommendation to the next meeting. But I think that's absolutely fine, and I think it's a good ask. In terms of Fuller, we'll do that work through the Primary Care Committee, but also I think through the Transformation Committee as well, because the Primary Care Committee is more about sort of the contracts, and we've got some separate sort of fora across Cheshire and Merseyside where we'll look at Fuller. So we've got the Primary Care Providers Forum, and we are looking at a primary care strategy. And referencing Graham's introduction, obviously the Secretary of State's announcements around primary care, a lot of those aspects are really sort of covered in Fuller. So we will have to respond to that, and so we'll bring something back to the board, but I think either through the Primary Care Committee and through the Transformation Committee.
Okay. Questions? Adam?
There we go. It's on. Just picking up a typo, really. The attendance by invitation, we seem to have lost the local pharmaceutical committee rep. We're operating that way. We have invited them. My colleague Mappy from Liverpool to come and attend those meetings, but it's gone off the terms of reference that we've been presented. So I think it's just been, as we've cut and pasted things, it's vanished.
Yep.
Point of order.
Just make sure it's right. Yep. Thanks, Adam. Just a question of my understanding, and it's both in relation to the terms of reference and how the board is working. You've identified the key risks of transfer of dental services. Where do things like your primary care workforce risks sit? So the impending, it's not impending, is it? The real critical shortage of GPs. Let's pick that one. Where does that sit in our work? Okay. Just put you.
We'd cover that in this committee, so it's not in the terms of reference again. We'll need to bring it, but we did at the first meeting last month. There was quite a detailed sort of baseline presentation on workforce and numbers, but we can do that routinely at the system committee, and I think that's where we work very closely with places, because they will have their own discussions, and they'll be sort of finding the solutions in place to some of these issues. But in terms of that strategic oversight, that would be through the primary care committee. So we'll make sure it's added, because it was part of the conversation in terms of some of the baselines, facts and figures.
Thanks, Claire. And this is why there's an importance with the discussion we're going to have about the people board in future meetings, to make sure that that accountability and governance works effectively. Okay, thank you. So I think there's two recommendations. One is to note, one is the other to approve the terms of reference of the committee. Are we happy to support those recommendations? Yes, thank you. Moving on to responses to questions raised by members of the public. I think there's 4 or 5 questions that we've been notified. There's a set of paperwork with the responses in that paperwork, and they'll be available on the website, I think, very shortly. Matthew, am I right in saying that? Yeah. Thank you. So, closing remarks from me. Really good meeting. Thank you for your participation and interest. I know there was a lot to get through, and I've had to push a bit in terms of timescales. Hope people do feel as though we're getting adequate time to discuss these important issues. And we'll do the normal communication briefing following this meeting. I am going to close the meeting a bit early, if that's okay, unless people have got any other business. None identified to me so far, but we have got something else happening immediately after this meeting. And I'm looking for Maria. I think she's right. Right. So I just say a few words of introduction, yeah. So this is, I feel quite emotional about this, and I'm going to use my own personal experience and then transpose it into Cheshire and Merseyside. So Queen Elizabeth, and God rest her soul, she awarded the NHS the George's Cross. The NHS isn't a body corporate that sits in Richmond House or wherever it is. It's made up of a million plus people who do fantastic work to support this country. The NHS wasn't alone, I think, in delivering that support, that work, that great, I guess, great effort that this country went to. There was many, many other people outside of the NHS who were critical to achieving what happened during that period of time. So personally for me, there was, by the end of August of last year, there was 1,671 people who died of COVID in the hospitals that I managed then. And there was 9 staff. My staff died of COVID during that time. I'm sure if we look at Cheshire and Merseyside, we will find thousands of people who died in the health and care system of COVID, and I am sure staff would have died of COVID during that period of time. And what I personally recognised, day in, day out during that period, I'm sure it's the same for every one of our organisations, GP practices, social care units, our wider partners during that time, was dedication of the highest order, bravery of the highest order, people who were dealing with really scary stuff that led to far fewer people dying, both staff and the populations that we serve. And so I thought it was a terrific award for the NHS, that recognition of the George's Cross. But Graham and myself talked about this, and we wanted to make a real statement to every single person in our ICS, in our ICB, that they mattered during the period of time that we supported the population to go through that pandemic, and we continue to support them. And so what we thought was really good was to award those people a certificate. I found myself thinking, that's just not enough, given what everybody did during that period of time. But I think often a formal thank you from body corporate like these boards goes a long, long way to give those people the recognition that they deserve for what was achieved and what continues to be achieved by so many people within our area, and it's not just the NHS. So, what we thought we'd do today is for a select group of people, we're going to formally award those certificates. So we have got people here, I think, here today.
We have.
Maria's going to call out the names, and we're going to award a certificate and a nice badge, and we'll have a round of applause for each person, if that's okay.
Absolutely. We did invite each of our longest serving members of staff from each of our 9 places to attend today, and 3 members of staff have been able to make it across, so we're going to do them in order. So, first of all, we have Janice Bleasdale, safeguarding nurse, who has done 40 years of NHS service this year. Next, we have Carmel Hale, designated nurse safeguarding adults, who has done 46 years of service this year. And we have Pauline Owens, another designated nurse safeguarding children, who's done 47 years of service this year.
And we'll need to correct Pauline's just because it says 74 years.
I'd like Pauline just to hang fire, because what we'd like to use the opportunity for is to also present our ICB board members, NHS board members with their certificates today, and I've asked Pauline to do the honour of that as our longest serving member of staff. So, Pauline, Raj, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Graham Irwin. Claire Wilson. Anthony Middleton. Christine Samoza. Claire Watson. Fiona Lemons. Christine Douglas. And Deborah Butcher. And every single one of our other staff members over the course of the next 2 weeks will receive exactly the same as part of our place staff briefings.
Thank you, everybody. So there, our Sefton colleagues have put on, I'm sure, a great show for us next door, clearly. I think it is. Oh, and lunch. So do make sure you go out and go and learn some stuff. Thank you.